Last year, I came across a story that's set differently than most. It was sent to me by a former park ranger who worked in Superior National Forest in the late 1980s. He never gave his real name, only going by Lunacy24, and he titled his story simply, "Never Speak It." According to Lunacy24, the veteran rangers had an unspoken rule, a word and a subject they refused to say out loud, and when he finally understood why, he wished he'd never asked. I can't say if this story is true or not, but after reading it, I understand why he felt compelled to send it to me. It's a warning, one we should all keep in mind. Why park rangers won't talk about the Wendigo. I'm writing this because my brother's daughter wants to be a park ranger. She's 20 now, studying environmental science at the University of Minnesota. And last month, she asked me about my time with the Forest Service. I gave her the same answer I've given everyone for the past 36 years. I worked that one season in Superior National Forest and decided it wasn't for me. That was a lie. The truth is, I'm the reason my brother Dalton wears a prosthetic left arm. I'm the reason 3 people transferred out of our station within 2 months. And I'm the reason northeastern sections of Superior National Forest had wildlife management closures for an entire year in 1987. I need to be clear about something before I continue. I've been sober for 12 years. I was not drunk during any of the events I'm about to describe. I wasn't on drugs, and I was not suffering from any kind of psychotic break. The medical evaluation I underwent after the incident confirmed I was of sound mind. I'm telling you this because I know how it might sound. I know what I'm about to describe seems impossible, but it happened. My name is Everett. Everyone calls me Rhett. In the summer of 1987, I was 23 years old, fresh out of the University of Wisconsin with a forestry degree and a head full of romantic ideas about wilderness work. My older brother Dalton had been a ranger in Superior National Forest for 8 years by then, and he helped me get a position at his station. I thought I was beginning a career. I lasted 4 months. This is what happened, and why. Superior National Forest covers over 3 million acres in northeastern Minnesota, butting up against the Canadian border. Most people know it for the Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness, over 1 million acres of pristine lakes and forest that you can only access by canoe or on foot. In '87, it was even more remote than it is now. Cell phones didn't exist, radio communication was spotty. Some areas hadn't seen human traffic in years. I reported to the ranger station near Ely, Minnesota that summer. The station was a small place with a main building with offices, a bunkhouse for rangers pulling consecutive shifts, and a maintenance shed. Our crew consisted of 7 people, including myself. Dalton was my immediate supervisor. He'd always been the responsible one, serious and thorough, the kind of man who'd read every manual cover to cover, even when I found it annoying. At 32 years old, he'd already been promoted twice, and was being groomed for a station chief position somewhere down the line. He took the work seriously, maybe too seriously, but people respected him for that. Station chief was Lennart, a Finnish-American in his mid-50s who'd spent his entire career in the forest. He had that weathered look people get from decades of outdoors experience, skin like leather and permanent squint lines. The guy's hands looked carved from wood, and he didn't waste words. Simone was the only woman on our crew, and the most experienced ranger besides Lennart. She was in her late 40s and had been in the service for 15 years. She had transferred from Montana after a divorce. She could outwork any of us and had no patience for complaints about hard conditions. Joel was a 28-year-old guy, French-Canadian, and the most easygoing person I'd ever met. He'd been there 3 years and knew the boundary waters like his backyard. He had a joke for every situation and made the long canoe patrols bearable with his stories. Vernon was our oldest ranger, pushing 65. He was planning on retiring at the end of the season. He'd worked in Superior for over 30 years. He was a very quiet guy, like he was always listening for something, and that something was none of us. I noticed he watched people more than he talked to them. The last two were seasonal rangers who rotated in and out, and they're not quite important to this story. For my first 2 weeks, the work was exactly what I'd dreamed. Backcountry patrols and maintaining campsites, checking in on hiking groups and monitoring wildlife. The Boundary Waters in summer is beautiful, but if I had to describe it right now, it would sound like I was reading from a tourism brochure. So I just won't try. All in all, it was hard work, physical work, and I loved it. Let's get to the first odd part. Joel and I were responding to a report about some lost hikers who turned out to be just fine. They'd gotten confused about their pickup location. On our way back to the station, we came across a deer carcass about 50 yards off the main trail. Joe stopped to examine it, which was something we were supposed to do. We documented any unusual wildlife activity or signs of poaching. "Huh," Joel said, crouching down next to it. "That's not right." "What isn't?" I asked. He pointed at the carcass. "The way it's stripped. Coyotes usually work from the belly, but this..." He trailed off and stood up. "Well, this must have been wolves. They're not common this far south, but it can happen." "Doesn't really look like wolf feeding patterns to me," I said. I'd studied predator behavior in school. You see these tears? They're too ragged. I pointed at them. Joel gave me a look, looked like he was doubting me. "Yeah, well, wildlife does what it does." He started walking again, faster than before. I followed. Should we report it?" "Already made a note." He didn't elaborate. That evening, back at the station, I mentioned it during dinner. We all ate together in the main building's common room, one of those forced camaraderie things that actually worked pretty well most of the time. "So Joel and I found this deer carcass out by Hegman Lake," I said. "Stripped up in a weird way, might want to keep an eye out for unusual predator activity." Vernon, who had been eating quietly, stopped with his fork halfway to his mouth. The pause was brief but noticeable. Dalton gave me a look I couldn't quite read. "What kind of predator activity?" "I don't know. That's the thing. The feeding pattern didn't match anything I learned about in school." "Probably coyotes," Simone said firmly. "They'll strip a carcass pretty thoroughly." "That's what I said," Joel added quickly. Leonard cleared his throat. "We'll make a note in the log. Anything else to report?" The subject changed to an upcoming supply run, and that was that. But I noticed Vernon didn't finish his dinner. Over the next few weeks, I started picking up on a pattern. There were certain topics that would cause the conversation to shut down right away. Any mention of the winter of 1979, for instance, missing persons cases from before 1980, specific sections of the forest, particularly the northeastern quadrants near the Echo Trail area. One evening in the middle of August, I was helping reorganize the storage room. It was one of those make-work tasks that they give to the new guy, and I found an old filing cabinet pushed against the back wall. The drawers were mostly empty, except for one labeled Incident Reports, 1975 through 1980. I pulled it open. There should have been hundreds of reports in a 5-year span, but I found maybe 30. The rest had been removed, and not neatly. I could see torn edges where the pages had been ripped out of binders. One partial report caught my attention. It was from 1976, and most of the text had been redacted with black marker. but one line near the bottom was still legible. Visitor reported hearing crying man near Esther Lake. No source located. Recommend follow-up. Someone had written in pen at the bottom, no follow-up. Close file. I heard footsteps and shoved the file drawer closed. Simone appeared in the doorway. Finding everything okay? Yeah, just about done. She glanced at the filing cabinet, then at me. That's old storage. We don't use those files anymore. Really, we should just throw it all out. Sure, I said. She lingered for a moment, then left. I didn't mention a word about what I'd found. The real confrontation came several days later. A group of campers came into the station mid-afternoon, clearly shaken up. They'd cut their trip short and wanted to report something. We heard someone in distress, the men said. His name was Derek, I think. Last night, around 3 a.m, it sounded like a man crying, like really upset. We thought someone got hurt. Where were you camping? Leonard asked. Little Trout Lake. We even yelled out, asking if anyone needed help. But the crying just stopped for a minute. But then it started up again from a different direction. We couldn't find out where it was coming from. His wife added, It sounded wrong. I'm not sure how to explain it exactly, but like someone mimicking crying? I jumped in, trying to be helpful. Probably just a loon. They make sounds that can seem almost human, especially at night. Or maybe a lynx. I read that indigenous peoples around here used to have stories about... It was an animal, Dalton said sharply, cutting me off. That's all. Sound travels pretty weird across water at night, and loons can make very unsettling calls. The campers seemed satisfied with that explanation and left. After they were gone, Dalton pulled me aside by my upper arm, harder than necessary. We need to talk. Outside. He walked me behind the maintenance shed, out of earshot from the main building. It felt like I was about to get Old Yellard. Stop it, he said. Stop what? Whatever you think you're going to say about what you've been reading or asking about, don't. I was just trying to help explain. I know exactly what you were about to say. His face was stone cold. Don't say that word here. Ever. I felt my temper and confusion rising. I had been walking on eggshells for weeks, trying to figure out why everyone acted so strange about certain things, and now my own brother was treating me like a child. What word, Dalton? Wendigo? Jesus Christ, man, I was just gonna mention that the local legends might explain why sounds seem scary to people at night. You know, folklore usually has a basis in... He went pale. Actually pale. Like blood had been instantly drained from his face. Don't say that word here. I'll leave out the curse he used. I'd actually never heard him curse at me before. We came from a family where cursing at someone was a serious thing. I just stared at him. You seriously believe in... He walked away. Just turned and walked back toward the main building, leaving me standing there. That night, I kept thinking about his reaction. Dalton was the most rational man I knew. He did not believe in ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot. He read Scientific American and Consumer Reports, for Pete's sake. The idea that he'd react that way to what I considered superstitious nonsense did not make sense to me. But I'd seen something in his eyes. Scared. My elder brother was scared. I told myself it wasn't that. Maybe he was stressed. Station chief responsibilities were probably getting to him. I mean, he was the big boss in training. I had no idea what kind of anxiety he might have been going through. And maybe the isolation out here was harder than I thought. There had to be a good explanation for what happened. Looking back now, I realize how arrogant I was. I was so certain that my education and rational mind gave me the superior understanding. I was 23 and had spent 4 months in the woods. My brother had spent 8 years there, some of the others much, much more than that. But I thought I knew better. That arrogance is why what happened next was my fault. I own that now. I've had plenty of time to own it. The incident that started everything happened over Labor Day weekend, 1987. The station was busy. It was the last big camping weekend before fall weather set in. Everyone was pulling extra shifts, and I was still somewhat in the doghouse with Dalton, so we'd been on different patrol rotations, which was fine with me. The tension between us could be exhausting. On Sunday, I was on duty at the station, handling radio calls and walk-ins, when a call came through around 4 in the afternoon. It was a fisherman, and he sounded middle-aged, trying to keep his voice steady and failing.
I need to report something at Disappointment Lake. I need someone to come out here,
he said. What's the nature of the emergency, sir? A pause, and then,
I found someone. A body.
It suddenly felt like I was underwater. Oh, are you certain they're deceased? There was another pause, and then,
I'm certain. I've seen dead bodies before. This ain't. You need to send someone.
We'll have a team out there within 2 hours. Can you provide your exact location? He gave coordinates for a small island on Disappointment Lake's eastern shore. He said his name was Curtis, and explained how he'd been fishing and seen something on the island that didn't look quite right. Leonard assigned Dalton and me. It was a 2-hour canoe trip from the nearest access point. Protocol was to send 2 rangers for any death investigation, and we were the most readily available. The paddle out was tense. Dalton and I hadn't really spoken since our argument. We stuck to operational communication. Should reach the access point by 5:30, he said. Copy that, I told him. This Curtis, the guy who called, did you get any other details from him? Just that he found a body on the island, wouldn't elaborate over the radio. Dalton nodded. We paddled in silence after that. Curtis was waiting at the shore when we arrived, standing next to his canoe. He had a weathered face and hands that shook slightly when he pointed toward the island. It's about 200 yards that way. Small island, mostly rock. I saw it from a distance and thought maybe it was a pile of clothes or something. But then I got closer. You didn't disturb the scene? Dalton asked. Hell no. Once I saw what that was, I came straight back and radioed you. Good. Stay here. We'll take a look and we'll report back. Curtis looked relieved not to be going back out there. Dalton and I paddled to the island. It was small, maybe 40 yards across, mostly granite outcropping with some scraggly pines. We saw the body from 20 feet away. Male, early 30s based on what I could tell. He'd been dead for several days. Decomposition was well underway in the late summer heat. He was lying on his back, or what was left of his back, near the center of the island. I'd seen dead animals before. I'd seen one dead person before, too. My grandfather in his casket. This was so much different. The man's face was locked in an expression I can still see whenever I close my eyes. His torso and legs had sustained massive trauma. Chunks of flesh were missing, but the wounds were not clean. They were torn and ragged, like something had ripped pieces away, rather than having bitten or cut them off. His hands were shredded, defensive wounds. The blood trail suggested he had been mobile during at least part of the attack, because there were drag marks and bloody handprints on the rock leading back toward the water, like he had tried to crawl away. His clothing was in tatters, scattered over a 30-foot area. One boot was in the water, the other was still on his foot. Dalton examined the scene more methodically. He was taking notes, not saying a word, but his face looked grim. I stood there, trying to catalog what I was seeing in some clinical terms, the way they'd taught us in training. Document, don't interpret. But my brain kept trying to interpret anyway. These wounds didn't match a coyote or a wolf or a bear attack. Bears bite and claw, they don't tear like this. For wolves, it was the wrong pattern, and for a coyote, it was too much damage. "Dalton," I said, "what could do something like this?" "I don't know yet." His voice was flat. "But you have an idea?" He didn't answer. He was looking at something beyond the body. I followed his gaze. About 50 yards up, on the other side of the island, there were 3 deer carcasses, all in various stages of decomposition, all showing the same ragged, tearing pattern. Curtis had noticed those too. Dalton keyed his radio. "Station, this is Ranger Maccabee. We've located the deceased individual. Requesting full team response and medical examiner. This is a code yellow situation." There was static, then Leonard's voice.
Confirm. Code yellow.
Affirmative. Multiple consistent indicators. A long pause. I could hear voices in the background at the station, but couldn't make out words. Eventually, Leonard came back on.
Understood. Team will deploy at first light. Maintain position until then. Do not pursue any leads tonight. Do you copy?
Copy that. We'll secure the scene. Leonard's voice changed then.
Dalton, be careful out there.
Will do, sir. I waited until he'd hung up the radio. What's code yellow? A designation for situations that require careful handling. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. He started marking off the scene with tape we carried for this purpose. We need to secure this, and camp here tonight. A team will come at dawn with the medical examiner. Wait a minute, camp here? With a dead body? Yes, Rhett. Curtis paddled away before sunset. Can't blame him for not wanting to stay. And we didn't need him to. Apparently, regulations said we had to maintain the scene, which meant staying on the island overnight. We set up a basic camp at the far end of the island, away from the body but where we could keep an eye on the scene. Dalton built a small fire. We ate MREs in the quiet. I tried and tried to start a conversation. I asked him what he thought happened, or what code yellow meant again. I asked if he thought it was a bear attack. Stop talking, he finally said. Just stop. Dalton, I'm just trying to understand what we're dealing with. What we're dealing with is a dead body that will be handled by the proper authorities in the morning. That's all you need to understand. Is this about, if you finish that sentence, I will write you up for insubordination? Whatever. I shut up after that. We took turns on watch, 2 hours each. I took the first shift. The sun set around 8:30, and the temperature dropped fast. It was early September and nights were already getting cold. The fire helped, but not as much as I'd hoped. Around 11, I woke up Dalton for his shift and tried to sleep. The sleeping bag was warm enough, but I couldn't relax. Discovering a dead body like that, it had me unsettled. Every sound seemed too loud. I listened to the water lapping against rock and the wind through the trees. I could hear an owl somewhere across the lake. At some point, though, I must have dozed off. because I woke up suddenly to find Dalton sitting rigid, staring out across the water toward the north shore. His rifle was across his lap. "What?" I started. He held up his hand, telling me to listen. At first, I didn't hear anything, but then I did. Someone was crying. It was distant, maybe half a mile away, coming from the direction of the north shore. A man's voice, weeping, not screaming or calling for help, just crying deep sobs that carried across the water. "What the hell is that?" I whispered. "Don't shine your light towards it. Do not call out, and don't move. Rhett, do you hear me? Don't move." I nodded my head. I had never heard Dalton's voice sound like that. So tight, so controlled and scared. The crying continued for about 15 minutes. It would fade away, then swell again. And at one point, it seemed to move, coming from a different location to the west. And then it stopped. Complete silence. Even the wind went quiet. Dalton stayed exactly where he was, rifle ready for another hour. I don't think he even blinked. I watched his hands, the way they were trembling. When false dawn finally started lighting the eastern sky around 5:30, Dalton finally moved. He stood up, stretched, and started to break down our camp without a word. I wanted to ask him about the crying. I wanted to demand him to tell me what the hell was going on. But something about the look on his face stopped me. The rest of our team arrived just after 7. Simone, Joel, and Vernon, plus the county medical examiner and 2 sheriff's deputies. They took photos, bagged the body, and documented everything. I overheard part of a conversation between Leonard and the medical examiner while they were loading the body into the canoe. "Same as 79? The examiner asked quietly. We don't talk about 79, Leonard said. The examiner nodded. "Animal attack, species undetermined. That's what I'll put in the report." "I appreciate that." Back at the station, there was an emergency team meeting. All rangers present. Leonard laid out new protocols. No solo patrols in the northeastern quadrants until further notice. All rangers to carry rifles on patrol, not just sidearms. Visitor access to certain areas would be temporarily suspended for wildlife management purposes, and absolute radio silence on speculation about the death. "The medical examiner has ruled it an animal attack," Leonard said. "That's the official determination. If anyone asks, that's what we tell them. We don't speculate on the species. We don't share graphic details. We express sympathy for the deceased and his family, and we move on. Understood?" Everyone nodded. "Good. Dismissed." As people filed out, I heard Vernon say quietly to Simone, "Third time's the pattern." She shushed him immediately. That night, lying in my bunk, my brain kept circling back to the same questions. The wounds on the body and those deer carcasses, the crying we'd heard, Dalton's fear and code yellow, the winter of 79. And apparently that one word that everyone seemed terrified to say out loud. I told myself I was being rational. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe a mentally ill person living in these woods. Maybe a rare predator species. Could be some combination of factors that created an unusual situation. But I also knew that I'd heard something out there on that island. And whatever it was, it had made my brother, who had done 2 tours in the forest, who'd faced down bears and evacuated injured hikers and dealt with armed poachers, shake with fear. I should have let it go. I should have trusted that silence. But I was 23, and again I thought I knew better. That was my mistake. Over the next week, I became obsessed. That's the only word for it. I spent my off hours in the station's small library. Really just a room with 3 bookcases full of forestry manuals, old National Geographic magazines, and donated paperbacks. But there were also personal notebooks left behind by previous rangers, logs that went back decades. Most were what you'd expect, weather reports and wildlife sightings and maintenance notes, but some had pages torn out. Clean tears. Reminded me of that filing drawer, the way the documents had very apparently been torn out. One notebook from 1976 had a notation that caught my attention. 3rd incident this month. VK. Suggests revival of old protocols. The entries after that date were sparse and vague, with no mention of what the incidents were or what the old protocols involved. VK. That had to be Vernon. He had been working here since the mid-70s. I found him one evening after dinner, sitting on the bench outside the maintenance shed, smoking a cigarette. Vernon was one of those people who seemed to exist on the periphery of every gathering, present but separate. I'd noticed he ate quickly and left the common room before anyone else. He volunteered for solo patrols more than the rest of us. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I said. He took a drag and breathed out slowly. "You can ask." "What happened here in the winter of 1979? Vernon looked at me for a while. Then he stubbed out his cigarette and stood up. "Good night, Red." "Look, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm trying to understand all this. A man died out there. We found him torn apart, and everyone's acting like we should just file paperwork and move on." Vernon stopped, then turned back to me. "You want to understand? Then understand this. There are things in these woods older than Minnesota itself, older than America, older than any name we've put to them. The only reason they leave us alone is because we leave them alone." "You're talking about folklore." "I'm talking about respecting silence." He studied my face. "Your brother ever tell you why he almost quit back in '79? No." "That should tell you something." Vernon started to walk again. "Some things aren't meant to be poked at, son. Some sleeping dogs should stay sleeping." He went into the bunkhouse and closed the door. The next incident happened 12 days after we found the body at Disappointment Lake. Mid-September, late afternoon. Joel and Simone were responding to a camper report about 2 miles north of Hegman Lake. A group had found their food cache destroyed. They'd hung it up properly, 12 feet up between 2 trees, like you're supposed to. But something had torn it down and shredded the bags. All the meat was gone. The dried goods were scattered, but uneaten. That alone wasn't unusual. Bears can be persistent and clever. But when Joel and Simone arrived, the campers reported that their dog was missing too. They found the dog a quarter mile away. Simone's voice came over the radio while I was manning the station. She sounded different and cautious. "Station, this is Reuter. We have another yellow situation requesting Ojikongas respond." That was Leonard. Leonard's jaw tightened. "Copy, maintain position. I'm en route with Maccabee." He had meant Dalton, not me. But Dalton was 2 hours away on a patrol near Fall Lake. I was the only one available, I can respond, I said. Leonard hesitated, then nodded.
Get your gear.
The hike out took about 90 minutes. We found Joel and Simone with the campers, who looked shaken. Their dog was a golden retriever, apparently, though it was hard to tell. The carcass had been partially eaten, accompanied by those familiar ragged tears. The campers were a couple in their 40s who had done this route a dozen times. They weren't the type to spook easily, but they were beyond spooked now. We heard something last night, the woman said. Around 2 a.m, crying like someone was in pain. We thought maybe another camper had gotten injured, but we couldn't find anyone.
Yeah, it moved, her husband added. We'd hear it from one direction, then a minute later it would come from somewhere else entirely.
Leonard and Simone exchanged a look.
We'll escort you out, Leonard said. Joel, document the scene. Rhett, help him.
While Joel took photos and measurements, I examined the carcass more closely. I'd grown up around hunting. I'd field-dressed deer, seen how predators fed. But this was all wrong compared to that. How could something look like it was bitten, but not have any teeth marks at all?
Don't overthink it, Joel said quietly.
How can you not overthink this? He lowered his camera.
Because overthinking it doesn't help. It doesn't change anything. Just makes you start seeing things and hearing things that aren't there.
Or makes you see and hear things that are there.
Rhett, man, he looked uncomfortable. Just take my advice. Let this go.
We hiked back and didn't say another word. Over the next week, the pattern expanded. 3 more animal carcasses were found within a 10-mile radius of the original incidents. A deer near Stewart Lake, a beaver at Moose River, an otter at Basswood Lake. All partially eaten, showing the same tearing pattern. The locations formed a rough arc, it looked like, moving south and east, toward more populated areas, toward the main access points. Hikers started to report odd experiences, feeling watched, hearing sounds we had difficulty matching to any known wildlife. 2 separate groups mentioned hearing crying in the middle of the night. One couple claimed they'd seen someone crouching by a creek near their campsite around dawn. When they'd called out to ask if the person needed help, the figure had looked up, then moved away on all 4s before disappearing into the trees. That couple left the forest immediately, filing a formal complaint about disturbed individuals being allowed to camp in the back country. Leonard instituted expanded closures. More areas became off-limits to visitors. We told people it was due to increased bear activity and ongoing wildlife management surveys. Most accepted the explanation, but some grumbled and still complied. The station fell into a tense routine. Patrols went out in pairs, always armed. Radio checking became more frequent. People stopped lingering after dinner. Vernon started to take his meals alone in the bunkhouse. But I just couldn't let it go. The more everyone insisted we treat this as routine wildlife management, the more I knew it wasn't. The evidence was mounting. Whatever was out there was active, aggressive, and expanding its range. During a staff meeting on September 28th, Leonard was discussing the closure protocols when I spoke up. Sir, we're shutting down half the forest. Because of what, exactly? A bear with unusual hunting patterns? Why aren't we calling in wildlife experts? Wildlife control? Why aren't we documenting this properly?
It is being documented properly, Leonard said.
But why all the secrecy? Why code yellow? Why won't anyone talk about what actually happened in '79? Simone cut in. Rhett, drop it. No, I'm tired of being treated like I'm not cleared to know basic operational information. Someone's gotta say it. You all think there's a Wendigo out there. The word hung in the air. Vernon stood up and walked out without a word. Joel stared at me like I'd just set the building ablaze. Simone's face went hard, and Leonard closed his eyes briefly, the way you do when you're counting to 10. "Meeting adjourned," Leonard said. Everyone filed out except me and Leonard. He gathered his papers slowly, not looking at me. "Sir, I want to understand what's happening. I have a right to know what I'm dealing with out there." "What you're dealing with is a situation that's been handled according to established protocols. Protocols that exist for good reasons." "What reasons?" "The kind that kept people alive before you got here." He looked at me then. "Did you know your brother took a leave of absence in January of 1980? "No, I didn't know that." "He didn't tell you he spent 3 weeks in the hospital? That he couldn't speak for the first 5 days? That he had to go through counseling before they'd clear him to return to duty?" I said nothing. Dalton had never mentioned a word of this. Leonard continued. "Smart kid. Capable. A lot like you, actually. Thought he had all the answers." He headed for the door. "The difference is Dalton learned, but you haven't." I found Dalton outside by the equipment shed. He was checking inventory, making notes on a clipboard. When he saw me approaching, his posture changed. He looked defensive. "Don't," he said. "We've got to talk about it." "No, we really don't." "Leonard told me you were hospitalized? He told me you had some kind of breakdown." Dalton's hand tightened on the clipboard. "He had no right to tell you that." "Then why didn't you tell me? Before I came out here, why didn't you warn me?" "Warn you about what, Rhett? What exactly do you think I should have said?" He threw the clipboard down. "Should I have told my little brother, who was so excited about his first real job, that sometimes people die in the woods in ways that don't make sense, and sometimes you hear things that shouldn't exist, that the Forest Service has protocols for situations that can't be explained in any official capacity?" "Yes, actually, that's what you should have told me." "You wouldn't have believed me. You would have thought I'd lost my mind." He picked up the clipboard. "You still think I've lost my mind, though? You think we're all caught up in superstition out here, freaked out about folklore?" "It's not that. I think something is happening that we don't understand. And instead of trying to investigate it, everyone's pretending it's not even happening." "You think this is a game?" Dalton's voice rose. "Do you think we're not taking it seriously? We're taking it so seriously that we've implemented every single protocol we have to contain it. We've closed down half the forest. We're running armed patrols. We're monitoring every report. What exactly do you think we should be doing differently? How about stop dancing around what it is?" "I can't explain it to you. I can't make it make sense because it doesn't make sense," he was shouting now. "All I know is that in the winter of '79, 3 people died in these woods, and before they died, people would not stop talking about it, wouldn't stop speculating, and wouldn't stop using that name. And then it stopped, Rhett. It stopped when we stopped talking about it." "That's correlation, Dalton, not causation." "I was there. I was 24 years old, and it was my 2nd year, and I saw what they found. I heard the sounds, and I watched it end the moment we instituted the silence protocol." He stepped closer. "You want to know what I saw? You want to know why I spent 3 weeks in a hospital?" "Yes, I do." Jesus Christ. I saw a man I'd worked with for 2 years, someone I ate breakfast with every morning, reduced to parts scattered across a quarter-mile of forest. I saw wounds that should not exist. I heard him scream over the radio while something killed him, and we were 40 minutes away and couldn't do anything to help. I heard those screams for months afterward, every time I closed my eyes. I didn't know what to say. So yes, Dalton continued, quieter now. I believe in certain legends, because I've seen what happens when you don't respect them. And I'll be damned if I'm going to watch my little brother make the same mistakes I did. He walked away. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what he told me. Part of me wanted to apologize. Part of me still thought there had to be a rational explanation, that everyone was too traumatized to see clearly. That second part won out. That's the part I regret now. The incident stopped a few weeks later. No new carcasses and no reports of unusual sounds or sightings. The forest seemed to settle back into its normal rhythm. Leonard began cautiously discussing when we might lift some of the closures. Maybe it's moved on, he said during a briefing. Migrated to a different territory. Vernon, who had barely spoken in days, said quietly, or maybe it's close enough that it doesn't need to hunt so obviously anymore. That's not helpful, Vernon, Simone said. Neither is complacency. But as days passed without incident, the tension at the station eased. People began to joke again at dinner. Patrols felt less like combat operations and more like regular work. Even Dalton seemed to relax a bit, though he and I weren't really talking all that much. I felt vindicated in a way. The panic had been overblown. Whatever had caused the deaths and the unusual predation pattern had moved on, just like Leonard said. It had been a bear or a pack of wolves with atypical behavior, and now they had migrated elsewhere. The silence protocol hadn't stopped a thing. The danger had simply run its natural course. Looking back now, I can't believe how stupid I was. How arrogant, how absolutely certain that my limited education and my 23 years of life gave me better judgment than people who'd spent decades in those woods. The call came in one day at 4:30 in the afternoon. A young couple, panicked voices over the radio. They'd hiked into the Hog Creek area despite the closure signs. The woman had fallen and injured her ankle. They needed help, but that wasn't why they sounded terrified. The man explained, his voice high and tight. Something came into our camp. My girlfriend tried to run and that's when she fell. It's getting dark. Please, you have to send someone. Can you describe what you saw? Leonard asked. I don't... It was... Please just send help. In the background, we could hear the woman crying. The man came in again. It's still here. I can hear it crying. Leonard looked at the duty board. Dalton and I were the closest. Simone was already committed to a medical evac near Knife Lake. Joel was at the far end of his patrol route. It'll take us 90 minutes to reach them, Dalton said, looking at the map. That's cutting it close to sunset, Leonard said. I know. Vernon appeared in the doorway. Take the Remington, not your service pistol. Dalton nodded and went to the gun safe. I grabbed my pack and followed him out. The hike to Hog Creek took us through dense forest, along a trail that had seen minimal maintenance. The couple had gone in despite closure signs, which meant they'd either ignored multiple warnings or hadn't seen them in their eagerness to find a secluded spot. Dalton set a brutal pace. He had the Remington, a .308 Winchester, much heavier firepower than our standard sidearms, slung across his back. I was carrying the medical kit and emergency supplies. We'd been hiking for maybe 30 minutes when I smelled it. Rot, but far from that normal decay smell you get in the forest. It was like meat mixed with spoiled coffee, but throw in a spoiled kiwi while we're at it. It was so uniquely disgusting that my stomach turned. Dalton stopped, unslung the rifle, then checked the chamber. "Stay close," he said. "What is that smell?" "Keep moving." Another 20 minutes in, we heard it, faint at first, and distant. Crying, like that night in the tent. A man weeping mournful and sustained. It seemed to come from west of the trail, maybe 200 yards out. I looked at Dalton. His face went all tight. "Don't look toward it. Don't call out. Don't shine your light in that direction. Just keep walking." "Shouldn't we?" "No. We keep walking." And that's what we did. The crying continued, following us, not getting closer but not fading away. It maintained the same distance, pacing us through the forest. The light was failing fast. We'd left at 4:45 and it was past 6 now. Sunset at this time of year comes early in northern Minnesota. The shadows between the trees were already deep. I couldn't help myself. I glanced to the left, toward where the crying was coming from. Through the trees, maybe 100 yards out, I saw a pale figure, hunched over in a way that looked very painful. The proportions seemed off, but the light was bad, and the distance made details beyond that impossible. It was rocking back and forth. The crying sound was coming from it. Dalton grabbed my shoulder hard enough to hurt. "Move, now!" We moved faster, but the crying followed. The couple's camp was a disaster when we reached it, just after 6:30. Their tent had been slashed, not torn. Food was scattered everywhere. The sleeping bag had been dragged about 20 feet and shredded. The man was in his early 20s, sitting with his back against a tree holding a hatchet. His girlfriend was on the ground next to him, her right ankle visibly swollen. Both of them looked like they'd been crying. "Thank God," the man said. His name was Brendan. "Thank God you're here." Dalton went straight to the girlfriend. "Casey, I'm Ranger Maccabee. Let me look at that ankle." While he examined her, I did a quick perimeter check. The camp was maybe 30 yards from Hog Creek itself, set in a small clearing. There was good visibility, which the couple had probably chosen for exactly that reason. They could see anything approaching, except they hadn't seen what destroyed their camp. "When did this happen?" I asked Brendan. "Around 4. We were at the creek washing up, and when we came back, the tent was like this. We heard something in the trees, something moving around, and Casey panicked and ran, and that's when she fell. Did you see what it was?" "No, but we heard it. Breathing, heavy breathing, right outside the tent fabric before we came back. And then, after Casey fell, we heard the crying." Dalton finished his examination. "Ankle's broken. We need to get her out of here tonight." "Can she walk?" I asked. "With support, slowly, but we need to move now. Full dark in 30 minutes. We packed quickly. Just the essentials. Everything else got left behind. Dalton fashioned a basic splint for Casey's ankle using gear from our kit and some tent poles from their destroyed tent. The crying had stopped while we were working. The silence afterward was somehow worse. "I'll take point," Dalton said. "Rat, you help Casey. Brendan, you're in the middle. Stay close. Stay quiet. If I tell you to run, you run, and you don't look back. Understood?" We all nodded. The first 20 minutes went smoothly. Casey was tough. She bit down on the pain and kept moving, with me supporting her weight. Brendan carried the packs and Dalton led with the rifle ready, using his flashlight to mark the trail. Then we heard it again. Not behind us, but ahead of us, on the trail, crying, that mournful cry. Dalton stopped. We all stopped. The sound came closer, still ahead, but moving towards us. "Off the trail," Dalton whispered. "Into the trees, slowly." We moved into the forest on the right side of the trail. Dense underbrush made it harder, especially with Casey's injury. But we managed 20 feet before Dalton signaled to stop. Through the trees, we could see the trail in the light from Dalton's dropped flashlight. Something moved into the beam. I saw it clearly for the first time. It was shaped like a man, naked, the skin gray-white, pulled tightly over bones that showed clearly. It was emaciated to a degree that didn't seem survivable. The ribcage was visible. The joints looked swollen and horrible. But somehow it moved, standing upright, but with that pained-looking posture. Its spine was curved forward, the legs bent slightly backward at the ankle, like it could drop to all fours in an instant. And it was crying. Tears ran down its face. The mouth hung open, slack, but the crying sound didn't come from the mouth. It came from deeper, from its chest, resonating. Casey made a small sound, and the thing's head snapped towards us. That face. I can still see it. Sunken eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like some wild animal's. Lips pulled back from teeth that looked too large. An expression of anguish and hunger mixed violently together. It took a step towards us. Dalton stepped out onto the trail, raising the rifle. "Back off!" The thing took another step. Dalton fired into the air, the shot echoing through the forest. The thing didn't flinch. It made a different sound now. Under the crying, a whining noise. It was hungry. Dalton fired again, this time at the ground in front of it. Dirt and rocks sprayed up. The thing moved. It dropped to all fours and came at us so fast. Not running, but something else. A scrambling, loping movement that covered ground impossibly quick. Dalton fired center mass. I saw the impact, saw it stagger, but it didn't go down. Then it vanished into the dark, only to reappear from a different angle, coming from the trees on our left. How could it move that fast? It was so difficult to track, one moment in front of us, the next circling us through the trees. "It's flanking us!" Dalton shouted. "Rhett, when I say go, you run. Get them to the canoes." "I'm not..." "That's an order." The thing lunged again from a new position. Dalton spun and fired, hitting it in the shoulder. It staggered, but used that impossible speed to circle back. It hit Dalton from the side, having covered the distance in seconds. They both went down. The rifle flew from Dalton's hands, landing 10 feet away. The thing was on top of him, moving fast, jittering almost. It had his left arm in its mouth. Dalton screamed. I dropped Casey's arm and ran forward, grabbing the rifle. I couldn't shoot. The two of them were tangled up together. I might hit Dalton. Blood was spraying, black in the flashlight. The thing was tearing at his arm, shaking its head like a dog with a toy. I swung the rifle like a club, connecting with the thing's head. A solid hit. The stock cracked. It let go of Dalton and turned to me. We were face to face, less than 2 feet apart. The eyes were terrible. Nothing human in them, just hunger. Bottomless hunger and rage and something else I don't have words for. The smell that came off of it made me gag. And then it lunged. Dalton, his left arm hanging all wrong, grabbed it from behind with his right hand, got hold of its neck, and pulled it backward. The thing twisted, inhumanly flexible, and began to claw at him. The creature kept writhing that unnatural speed and flexibility, letting it twist in ways that shouldn't be possible. Dalton was still screaming, but not from pain now, from effort. He had the thing in some kind of hold, using his body weight to keep it down, but it kept nearly breaking free. "Run!" His voice didn't sound right. It was so raw and desperate. "Get them out! Run!" Brendan was already pulling Casey away. She was sobbing, but I stood there frozen. Dalton and the thing were rolling on the ground. The creature's movements were so fast and erratic, it was like fighting smoke, breaking free, twisting back, lunging again in one fluid nightmare of motion. "Rhett, go!" I ran. I grabbed Brendan, half-carried Casey with him, and we crashed through the forest back toward the trail. Behind us, Dalton screamed again, different than the last, and the sound cut off. We ran. I don't remember the details of the hike out. My brain was in pure panic. We hit the trail and followed it by flashlight. Casey wasn't crying anymore. She'd gone quiet, in shock probably. Brendan kept asking about what was happening, and I couldn't answer, because I didn't have an answer. We made it to the canoe launch after midnight. I got them into a canoe and paddled out until I felt safe, and got on the radio. "Station, this is Maccabee, officer down, single attacker, need immediate support. Medical evac, send everyone." My voice sounded strange, flat like someone else was using my mouth.
"Rhett?
It was Leonard.
What's your location?"
I gave him the coordinates.
"Who's down?"
Dalton. We were attacked. He told me to get the civilians out. He's still out there."
"What attacked you?"
I couldn't say it. Couldn't make the words come out. "I don't know. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. Please send help."
"Copy. Response team deploying. Stay at the launch point. Do not go back in. Do you understand me?"
"Yes."
"Rhett, do not go back in."
I didn't go back in. I sat at the launch with Brendan and Casey until the first response vehicle arrived 40 minutes later. Then more vehicles. Ambulance for Casey, sheriff's deputies. Simone showed up with Joel. Leonard arrived in his personal truck, still in civilian clothes. They organized a search team, 8 people, heavily armed with portable lights. I tried to go with them, but Leonard wouldn't allow it. "You're in shock. You stay here." They found Dalton 3 hours later. He was half a mile from where we'd been attacked. He'd crawled part of the way, walked part of the way too. His left arm was hanging by tissue and skin. Everything else had been torn away. Muscle, tendons, most of the bone. He'd lost enough blood that he should have been dead. But he was conscious when they found him. Conscious and hypothermic and going into shock. But alive. The medical helicopter took him to Duluth. I wasn't allowed to go with them. Leonard drove me to the hospital instead. A 3-hour drive, and for the most part, we didn't speak. Dalton was in surgery for 7 hours. They tried to save the arm, but couldn't. Too much damage. They amputated below the elbow. I wasn't allowed to see him for the first week. Family only. And they didn't seem to want to count me once our parents arrived from Wisconsin. My mother looked at me like I'd done it myself. Maybe I had. When I finally got into his room, Dalton was awake. The stump of his left arm was bandaged. He looked gray. "Hey," I said. He turned his head to look at me. Didn't say anything. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "You should have listened," he said. His voice was rough. "You should have listened." That was all he said. A nurse came in and told me visiting hours were over, and I left. The official report called it an animal attack, species undetermined. Dalton's statement to the sheriff was brief. Dark conditions, attacked by something he couldn't identify. He'd fought it off long enough for me to get these civilians to safety. The medical examiner noted that the wounds were inconsistent with known predator patterns, but couldn't offer an alternative explanation. Brendan and Casey gave their statement about seeing an emaciated man. That statement was noted but not emphasized. The official conclusion suggested they'd misidentified a bear in poor lighting and traumatic conditions. No search was conducted for the attacker. The area was designated for expanded closure, pending further wildlife assessment. Vernon retired that month, which was a month earlier than he planned. Didn't even finish out his notice period, just packed his things and left. Joel requested a transfer in November and got sent to Wisconsin. I heard later he quit the Forest Service entirely within a year. Leonard stayed on as chief, but he looked 10 years older in a matter of months. I tried to keep working. I went back on patrol rotation early the next month. Made it 3 days before I found a deer carcass with the same tearing pattern we'd seen before. I had a complete breakdown. Couldn't breathe and couldn't move. Simone had to talk me down over the radio for a while before I could hike back out. I requested leave on November 18th. I made it permanent on December 3rd. Leonard accepted my resignation without comment. Before I left, I had one final conversation with him in his office. "It's not your fault," he said. "He lost his arm because of me. He lost his arm because something in these woods is wrong. It has been wrong longer than either of us has been alive." He leaned back in his chair. "But you broke the protocol. You spoke its name. You invited attention. So that silence thing, it's not superstition. The silence is survival." He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Old and yellowed pages. "Winter of 1979. We lost 3 people in 6 weeks. Before that, in 1962, we lost 2. In 47, 4 died. Every incident was preceded by the same thing. People talking about it, speculating, using the name. And every incident stopped when we stopped talking." That doesn't make sense. No, it doesn't. But it's documented, and it's consistent, and it's the only thing that's ever worked. He closed the folder. "Some things don't have explanations, Rhett. They just have patterns. And the smart thing is to respect the patterns even when you don't understand them." I went back to Wisconsin, my parents' house. A grown man sleeping back in his childhood bedroom, jumping at every sound outside. I fell apart over the next few years, moved to Duluth, then Minneapolis. I couldn't hold a job for more than a few months, and my relationships failed. I drank too much. I was angry all the time, at myself mostly, but it spilled over onto everyone around me. Dalton and I didn't speak from 1988 to 1995. I'd call on holidays and he'd be polite and distant. He got married, had kids, built a life, and I wasn't part of it. Finally, I sobered up in 1999. I started to put things back together. I reached out to Dalton again, really reached out this time. He was accepting. We rebuilt something, not what we had before, but something. He tells people he lost his arm in an industrial accident. His kids don't know the truth. His wife might, but I've never asked. We never talk about that night. We never talk about Superior National Forest. Never talk about what happened. Until now. One year, I saw Vernon's death in the newspaper, in the obituaries. He died at 88 years old, survived by 3 children and 7 grandchildren. I wanted to attend the funeral, but I thought that wouldn't be right. He wouldn't have wanted me there. But his passing got me thinking about that time and about what happened, about all the people who know what's in those woods and keep quiet about it. Then last month, Dalton's daughter called me. She's 20, studying environmental science at the University of Minnesota. She wants to be a park ranger.
Dad won't talk about his time in the Forest Service, but you were there. Can you tell me what it's really like?
She asked. I gave her the same lie I've given everyone for 36 years. That it was hard work and I decided it wasn't for me. After I hung up, I realized I needed to tell the truth. Not to my niece. She doesn't need this weight. But to someone, to anyone who might listen. I don't expect you to believe in the Wendigo. I barely believe it myself, and I saw it. But I believe in this. Some legends are warnings. When people who live close to the wild tell you not to speak of something, there's a reason. When folklore says a name gives power, there's wisdom there, even if you can't see the mechanism. I was young, arrogant, rational, I thought. Believed I knew better than people who'd spent decades learning the patterns of that place. And my brother ended up being the one to pay the price. Because I had to push and pry about it. I broke the silence. I own that. I've spent decades owning it. I'm going to visit Dalton next week. I've printed this out. I'm going to show it to him first, before I share it with anyone else. I don't know if he'll approve of me telling this story. He might ask me not to. If he does, I'll respect that. I owe him that much and more. But I hope he'll understand why I needed to write it down. Why I need to get it off my chest. Not for forgiveness. I don't think I deserve that. But maybe so that someone else will learn what I learned. That the old ways exist for good reasons. Sometimes silence is the only shield we have. Some folks were asking for a new set of short stories, and I literally got one shot by that Burger King foot lettuce disease that's going around, so what the heck. Here's a set of assorted scary true stories from viewers about tall, thin monsters, demons that love high places, and things that go tap at your window after dark. I'm Darkness Prevails. This is Unexplained Encounters. Don't eat fast food lettuce right now, and let's begin. Dogman in Turkey. From EMZ CKGZ 27. This story begins in Turkey, where I'm from. I love my home country. The wilderness, the food, the animals, all of it. But after this happened, I'll never look at it the same way again. It all happened at 12:34 a.m. on Sunday, the 26th of July. We have 4 or 5 stray cats that live around here, which I usually feed lamb liver at night. After I empty out the little box the liver comes in, I throw it into the bin, which is around 10 to 15 feet away from the entrance to the property. We only have one streetlight, right in front of our house, and none around the corner to the right of it. That road is long, completely dark, and leads to our neighbor's house. Anyway, as I was approaching the large metal bin to throw away the liver box and the little scraps of meat stuck to it, I heard a deep growl. It kind of sounded like a man trying to sound like a wolf or a large dog. I'm not quite sure how to better explain it. It didn't sound exactly like a wolf, and it didn't sound exactly like a man. As a matter of fact, it didn't sound like anything I've ever heard before. Now and then we do get stray dogs that pass by. Some bark and some snarl, and some just walk by peacefully. But this sounded far too heavy for a normal stray dog, and far too deliberate. I turned around, slowly and cautiously, trying not to startle whatever was standing about 15 to 20 feet in front of me. I could barely see it, because the streetlight didn't quite reach where it was standing. All I could make out were 2 glowing yellow eyes, and I could smell a horrible stench coming from the creature, like rotten flesh mixed with spoiled eggs. The eyes were surprisingly high off the ground, around 8 or 9 feet. It growled again, a loud, deep, bone-rattling growl. It bared long, knife-sharp canines. In fact, every single tooth in its mouth looked razor-sharp. I didn't know what to do. My body completely froze, brain racing through thousands of thoughts at once. What is this? Could it be? Then the enormous creature took one slow step towards me. I could finally see it more clearly. Instead of paws, it had human-like feet and long claws in each toe, if they were even toes. Its fur was a dark gray with patches of brown scattered across its body, presumably dried blood. Its hands ended in even longer claws. I could make out its head now, too. It had a long snout, a pointed nose, and ears that curled slightly at the tips like horns. It was still snarling, still making some kind of noise I can't describe. I simply don't have the words for it. Its entire body was unnaturally muscular. It had incredibly broad shoulders, yet its legs were strangely long and thin, making the proportions look horribly unnatural. I still couldn't move. Even though every instinct screamed at me to run away, my body refused to do a thing. I was shaking uncontrollably. My blood had turned to ice. The thing inched closer, patiently. I genuinely believed I was going to die right there. Then, thank God, I heard my dad shout my name. I had taken far too long to take out the rubbish, which obviously worried him. But I wasn't taking out the rubbish anymore. I was standing frozen in place while this thing stared straight through me, as if it were looking into my soul. The creature turned towards the direction of my dad's voice and vanished. It sprinted back down the dark road around the corner faster than anything I'd ever seen. I finally snapped out of it and bolted back up the stairs into my safe, four-walled home. I started tearing up, probably due to all of the adrenaline, fear, and emotions, all catching up to me at once. I tried to explain everything to my parents. I doubt they believed me. After I finished, I noticed they were smirking at one another before continuing to watch TV. Eventually, I calmed down a bit. I brushed my teeth, took a shower, and read a book before preparing for bed. Think that was the end? No, not even close. I was hoping that would be the end of it, that this creature would never come back, and life would simply go back to normal. God, I wish that was the case. You see, I sleep in our living room. Our house was still being worked on at the time, so I had to. My bedroom wasn't finished yet, and we hadn't installed curtains. Every single window in that house was exposed. I think you can already guess where this might be going. I set up the couch where I slept. Right beside it, slightly elevated, was a large window. It had no bars, no shutters, and nothing on it. It was a bare sheet of glass. 3 hours passed. I couldn't sleep. It must have been around 3 a.m. by then, maybe 4. I couldn't tell. I kept replaying what happened outside in my head. What if my dad had never called me? What if I'd been just a bit farther away? What would it have done if it reached me? Normally, I'd hear insects, birds, or the occasional cricket outside. Tonight, there was nothing. Just absolute silence. I tried to force myself to sleep. My mom was asleep on the couch opposite mine, and my dad was snoring on the small air mattress we'd bought in London before flying here. Suddenly, I heard a tap at the window. My heart instantly dropped, my stomach twisting into a knot. Was it back? Had it found me? My brain began to race again. More adrenaline began to flow through my body. I slowly turned to my right, very, very slowly. There it was, the same glowing yellow eyes, the same curled ears, its heavy breathing fogging up the window. And once again, it was growling. I could no longer move. I couldn't budge to wake my mother. I couldn't scream to wake my dad. I could only watch. Then, the most horrifying thing happened. It smiled. That's right, it smiled like a man. Its sharp yellow teeth slowly revealed themselves as it grinned at me. Then another thump echoed through the room. It placed one of its hands against the glass, slowly rubbing it in circles, as if it was mocking me. Our house sat around 5 or 6 feet from the ground. The window was even higher, yet this thing could easily press its head, shoulders, and upper body against it. It was far taller than I'd first realized. That made everything even worse. Then it started to knock, softly, almost carefully, as though it didn't want to wake anybody else. A moment later, it stopped smiling. It bared every single tooth in its mouth at me and growled louder than before, and the knocking became heavier. Thump, thump, thump. I honestly thought it was trying to break in, trying to get inside, and this continued for I don't know how long. That's when I heard a voice. Oh my God. It was my mom. She had seen everything, and she immediately began to pray. My mother was a deeply religious woman. By some miracle, I think her prayers worked. The creature stopped. It bent down and ran away. From the sound of it, it went down to all fours to run. Eventually, I could no longer hear it. All too slowly, daylight began to appear. The birds returned. The insects started to hum again. Life sounded normal. My mom finally realized I hadn't been making the whole thing up, and we both cried together, until my dad woke up and saw us. I'm sure he thought we were crazy, so we explained everything to him, and with my mom now backing me up, he simply nodded, turned around, and called my uncle. We stayed with my uncle for a time, far away from our village, and we stayed there until our house was finally finished. We installed bars on the windows, put up 3 security cameras. Thank God we never saw that hellish nightmare again. Let this story be a warning. The wilderness of Turkey may look beautiful, but sometimes the things hiding inside it aren't. A Maid's Tale. From Timber. This is not my story. This is a story told to me by a friend of mine, who was told this story by her mother, who was told this story by her mother too. It's a very old story, passed down generation after generation, all the way from 1899. My friend gave me permission to tell this story here, so here we go. Way back when, all the way back to the year 1899, there lived a wealthy family on a large plot of land somewhere in or near Appalachia, although the exact location has blurred over the years. Some folks say this took place in Pennsylvania, others say Tennessee or Kentucky. Nobody knows for sure anymore. The focus of this story, however, is a young servant, 14 years old at the time, who came to work for this family at the young age of only 10, after her own parents were killed in a farming accident. She was born poor, a farm girl through and through, who never imagined she'd be living in a mansion caring for a wealthy man's heir and his young betrothed fiancé. For the sake of this story, I'm going to call this maid Trudy. Trudy began working for this family at the birth of their young girl. We'll call her Mary, as was still rather common among aristocracy at the time. Little Mary was promised to the other family's young son, only weeks after her birth. There was quite an age difference between them, but again, this wasn't uncommon at the time. Trudy, only 7 years old and carrying the fresh trauma of being orphaned, was handed little Mary the day she was born. The family was far from short-staffed. Cleaning, cooking, and such were taken care of already. Therefore, Trudy, having been taken in and hired mostly out of pity, was designated to look after the children. At the time of this story, we assumed that Mary was around age 7, while her teenage fiancé, I'm going to call him Cal for the sake of this story, was around 17. Now, despite their notably snooty parents, Cal and Mary spent much of their days trailing behind young Trudy. Mary saw Trudy as more of a mother than anything, and Cal, well, he tried to appear indignant at the idea of someone younger than him, a girl no less, being in charge of him. In truth, though, Trudy was one of the very few sources of love and attention the boy had. His mother was cold, and his father cared far more about showing off his son than actually being a father. And so Trudy it was for these youngsters. She wasn't required to, but having spent her entire life up until this point on a farm, Trudy very much enjoyed that type of work. Obviously, the spoiled rich weren't about to argue with anyone who wanted to do extra work. Therefore, Trudy acquired just about as many farm chores as she wanted, just so long as she watched the children as well. That meant, of course, tagging them along with her. While their parents spent days sipping tea and engaging in endless gossip, Cal and Mary got to spend their days outside, in the fresh air. As kids should, if you ask me. They passed the time riding horses, collecting eggs, and learning to milk cows and goats. Little Mary took her naps in the barn loft. Cal became rather skilled at breaking green horses, and sometimes Trudy would wake the two of them up late at night to come see whatever new calf, foal, or baby goat had been born. Between that summer and her birth, Mary would rest in a wrapped shawl on Trudy's back until she was old enough to toddle around behind her. Meanwhile, Cal would come in at night, smelling like hay and animals, earning a scoff from his father that the boy very quickly decided to ignore. Life was good. Not for a single day had any of them felt unsafe on that big farm, until the summer of 1899. By this point, 17-year-old Cal had developed somewhat of a broody, tough guy personality, as many teenage boys do. This detail will be important later. One early morning, little Mary had snuck outside to check on the newest calf in the herd, but had run back inside, screaming and crying. Trudy was in her robe and downstairs in seconds, as the poor little girl cried hysterically in her arms, blubbering out a story that could only be understood in bits and pieces. She took Trudy by the hand, dragging her outside to the barn in her slippers. The grass was still covered in dew, and fog hung low in the field. By this point, Cal, along with the adults, had been woken up by all the commotion, so they followed Trudy and little Mary out to the barn. What they found was horrific. The newest calf, only a day or so old, had been slaughtered in the barn, strewn everywhere, the smell of blood mixing with wet hay. The panicked mother cow was backed against the far wall, eyes wide and breathing hard. It took everything Trudy had not to scream and cry herself as she picked up Mary, clutching the child to her chest as she took a few steps back, reaching behind herself and taking Cal by the hand. When she looked up at the boy, he was pale, eyes swimming with tears he tried desperately to hide from his father. His father, however, was far too busy yelling and swearing about coyotes to notice his son. Coyotes. That's what the adults agreed on, and that's what Trudy told the children. But there was one thing, a detail that Trudy kept to herself, that made her doubt the coyote theory. The barn door had been closed that night. She had latched it herself, and that latch was high enough that Trudy had to reach above her head a bit to reach it, and it was nearly, if not a little more, than 6 feet off the ground. There was no way a coyote could reach that latch, even by accident. That night, Trudy ushered the kids inside sooner than usual. Previous nights, she would stay out late to let Mary catch fireflies, but not tonight, and no one argued. She helped serve dinner, gave Mary a bath, and tucked in both kids. Although Cal may have been a bit old for that, this night he did not protest. But that whole time her eyes kept drifting to the windows. She double-checked every lock on all the doors and windows, and had a hard time falling asleep that night. At some point during the night, Cal woke up to noises outside. It started as footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps that seemed to be circling the house. He had initially thought maybe it was Trudy, checking on the animals. A reasonable thing to do after what had happened to that poor calf. But these footsteps were too heavy. Trudy was a small girl, too small to be making that much noise. Eventually, the footsteps began to move away, towards the field. Then the cattle started to panic. Cal bolted upright in bed, already swinging his legs over the side. For a moment, he considered waking Trudy up, or his father, but being the young man he was, he decided he was old enough and tough enough to check it out on his own, and so he went outside. He stepped out onto the back porch, which faced the cattle, and strained his eyes under the light of the moon. The cows were huddled on one end of the field, pressed so tight against the fence, it looked as if they might break it down. And there in the center of the field, taking long, exaggerated steps toward the herd, was the thing. It was tall. Its posture was hunched, despite having no roof above it out in the open. It had long, lanky arms that would have touched the ground if it hadn't been holding them bunched up at its sides. Its legs were no better, long and bent awkwardly, like a canine forced onto its hind legs. It appeared way too thin, with a bony-looking torso and a neck that was too long. And the head looked too big for that neck. The head was shaped sort of like an elk's or perhaps a horse's, but for Cal it was too hard from that distance to tell, especially given the dark. Cal stood there, frozen on the porch, wide-eyed. He went to take a step back toward the still open door when his foot hit a loose board, making a loud creaking sound in the otherwise nearly silent night. The creature's head snapped around to face him, the head facing opposite the body like an owl. Then its body swiveled around to match, and it charged at the house. Cal screamed, barreling inside and slamming the door shut, locking it. He ran upstairs, taking 2 steps at a time. The boy barged into Trudy's room, where she was already sitting up in bed, awake, probably having heard him scream. This tough kid who had spent most of his teenage years feigning indifference to just about everything was now bawling like a child a third of his age, crawling up on the bed with Trudy, wrapping himself around her and practically in her lap. Trudy clutched the boy, holding him despite him being considerably taller than her. He could barely get the words out between hiccuping breaths, and all the commotion had woken little Mary, who'd come in crying and scared too. It wasn't long before the whole house was awake. The men of the house and the male servants then marched outside with guns. They searched the property, and a few shots were fired before the men came rushing back inside, just about the same way that Cal had. They never told anyone what they found, what they shot at. But considering that Cal's father hadn't even bothered to scold or roll his eyes at his sobbing teenage son, Trudy assumed that they had seen it too. After that night, they never saw it again, never lost any more animals either. The women and children were ordered to stay inside after dark, but that was all that came of it. According to the story, some think that the men shot and killed the creature that night. Others think it simply moved on, not wanting humans aware of its presence. Nobody knows for sure. And of course, I don't know how much of this is true or not. But I will say one thing. For a story to be passed down for over 100 years, not changing much at all between tellings, I'd say somebody absolutely saw something that night. Many legends are not some trend for attention. Folks have been seeing strange things and nightmarish things for a very long time. It was in the school. From Mountain Lover 9245. Ever since I could remember, I've had a fascination with the paranormal. That includes ghosts, cryptids, abandoned places, disappearances, anything that couldn't be explained. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to know more about. I would spend hours upon hours watching documentaries or being on forums, listening to people tell their stories about things that most people would never see. I always wanted to believe, but I never thought that it would really happen to me. I thought it was something that only happened to other people. I was wrong. If you've ever watched videos about cryptids or ghost stories, then what I'm about to say might give you second thoughts. Whether you believe me or not is a different story, but I know what I witnessed, and I wish I'd never seen it. I lived in a small farming community in Montana, about 20 miles outside of Billings. It was a small town. The roads were quiet and fields of grass surrounded the city. At night, all you could hear was the wind, coyotes, and the occasional train. Nothing much ever really happened here. Our school was the same way. It was a small school. We only had about 60 kids graduating each year. Some kids would tell stories about hearing footsteps in the empty hallways, lights turning on and off by themselves. Teachers would joke about that, and most people would just laugh it off. So would I. Since my house was only a few blocks away from the school, I decided to get a custodian job at the place. I filled out an application, and a few days later I got an email saying that I got the job. My first day was going to be October 16th, which happened to be my birthday. Now, I wasn't the biggest fan of working that night, but it was a job. Before I go any further, let me just give you a little background on the school. When you walked in the high school doors, the office was to your right. To your left was a wide staircase that led up to the second floor. Straight ahead was the common area. It was a large open room where kids could congregate during lunch and before class. Upstairs, the building opened up into a few long hallways with classrooms. One hallway led to the gym, another to the science building, and one overlooked the common area from a mezzanine. The building was always busy during the day, but at night, it was a different story. The fluorescent lights would buzz, every sound you heard or made would echo, pipes would rattle, the building would make weird popping noises as it cooled down for the night. But all of this wasn't anything out of the ordinary. No, the out-of-the-ordinary things waited until October 29th, 2019. I was walking up to the school doors at about 7:45 that evening. It was a nice October night. My breath came out in clouds as I walked up to the doors. Inside, the building was quiet, except for the buzzing lights. Standing next to the custodian supplies was Hannah. At the time, she was my girlfriend, and as of recently, she's my wife. We both worked for the school, and neither one of us knew that the other would be there that night. We both smiled and made small talk about how lucky we were before heading upstairs to start cleaning. For the first hour or so, we cleaned the rooms and talked about our day. It was a slow night, nothing crazy. We swept the floors and took out the trash. Then we cleaned the windows. A usual night for us. We had done this 100 times. Suddenly, Hannah stopped cleaning and looked right at me. Just outside the room we were cleaning was one of our mop buckets. It was about half full of dirty water and lying on its side. We'd put it there only a few minutes ago. Water was all over the hallway floor as if someone had kicked the bucket over, but neither of us had heard anyone walking by. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else in the building, and neither I nor Hannah had done that. Even so, Hannah frowned and asked, "Did you knock that over?" I shook my head. "No, I thought you did." We both looked at the puddle of water on the floor. It wasn't anything that made me think that something was terribly wrong. Maybe we didn't put it down right. Maybe someone from another shift had walked by and we didn't know it. I shrugged it off. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. Around 9:30 that night, the building started to get quiet. It was unusually still. The air conditioning had stopped. The pipes didn't even rattle. All the noises were absent, as if to make room for what followed. Footsteps. Big, heavy footsteps. They made a loud sound echoing throughout the hallway, like thunk, thunk, thunk. Hannah and I looked at each other. I thought it was another custodian who had stayed after hours. I walked up the hallway and peered outside. There was no one standing there. Instead, something was crawling around the corner. It wasn't walking. It was on all fours. Long, spidery arms stretched out in front of it as it moved. Its skin looked pale, almost ghostly white under the lights. It was thin. I could see every bone in its body. And the way its legs bent was so unnatural. With every step it took, it made this loud, cracking sound. Its fingers scraped against the floor, making a sound that still gives me chills. Slowly, it raised its head and looked at us. That was one of the most disturbing parts, because its eyes looked almost human. That's when something inside me snapped. I knew this wasn't human, that whatever this thing was, it didn't even belong on this earth. Every instinct inside of me was screaming to run. Neither Hannah nor I said a word as we slowly turned around and ran. The nearest place to hide was the janitor's closet, just down the hallway. I threw the door open and practically shoved Hannah inside before slamming the door and locking it behind us. We both stood there, catching our breaths. Neither of us said anything for about a minute straight. Hannah looked up at me, more scared than I've ever seen her. Her face was pale and she was crying silent tears. "What was that?" she whispered. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to comfort both of us, but I had no answer. All I could do was put a finger to my lips. Outside the door, we could still hear the heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway. Whatever that thing was, it was looking for us. It stopped walking, and we held our breaths. Suddenly there came a scratching sound against the door. We dared not breathe. It felt as though several minutes passed by before the heavy footsteps began to walk away. And it wasn't until they were gone that we let out a breath. We hugged each other tightly, thinking it was all over. But we would be wrong. A few days later, I was working another night shift. This time Hannah wasn't there. She'd gone home and I was partnered up with another custodian by the name of James. The two of us cleaned the school until he was done, and he went on home, which left me to finish the rest of the jobs by myself. By then the school felt even more frightening. Every empty hallway seemed to stretch on for miles, and every shadow made me jump. I swept the floors, cleaned the windows, and took out the trash. Simple little things that I'd done so much before. But I had a feeling that entire time, the moment James left, that I was being watched. No matter where I was, I had this horrible sensation that someone was looking at me. I kept looking up at the second floor, expecting to see something or someone looking back. Then I heard it. Thunk, thunk, thunk. My heart basically stopped. I slowly turned my head towards the mezzanine. Standing there was the same thing that Hannah and I had seen a few nights ago. It was watching me, long spidery arms dangling down by its knees. Its pale face was emotionless, and its eyes were still the same human-looking eyes I'd seen the other night. Except now, I was alone. We stared at each other, neither one of us moving an inch. My heart pounded so loud that I was sure that it could hear my heartbeat. Then it jumped. Not climbed or crawled, but jumped, and it landed right in front of me with a loud crash, breaking the floorboards underneath us. Before I could react, it was already running across the common area on all fours. It jumped through the large windows of the high school office and disappeared. I stood there, petrified, my brain not registering what just happened. It took a moment, but eventually my body reacted and I ran. I didn't lock the doors. I didn't finish my shift. I didn't even look back. I ran the 2 blocks home faster than I'd ever run in my life. When I made it back, Hannah was waiting for me. She saw the look on my face, how I was out of breath, and she didn't even need to ask what happened. The 2 of us stayed up all night that night. I've heard stories about skinwalkers before, but those stories always came from the Navajo people in the American Southwest. Montana wasn't exactly the place where I thought I would see something like that. Even to this day, I still don't know what that thing was. Maybe it wasn't a skinwalker. Maybe it was something else. Whatever it was, it terrified us enough to make us move out of state. I've never gone back to that school, and even now, when I hear footsteps echoing through an empty building at night, I think about what would have happened if we hadn't run. The Living Shadow, from Void Hunter 6250. I'm posting this in the hope that someone may finally believe me about what happened when the shadows realized I could see them. Let me give you context. I have something called nyctophobia, the extreme and irrational fear of the dark. I won't go into great detail about the side effects, but one of them that I have is seeing and hearing things that isn't there whenever I'm in the dark. However, these visions, or however you want to call them, follow 3 rules that depend on whether I see or hear anything. Rule 1. I have to be anxious or afraid. Rule 2. I have to be around few to no people. And Rule 3, which is common sense. I have to be in the dark. My little visions never broke those rules, and all of them have one thing in common. They were just like pictures, never moving and predictable, because they're based on what I know. That's why I can firmly say what I saw was not due to my phobia. I saw this thing a few times, but the 3 major incidents happened over the span of 2 years. About a year after we moved into this house, when I was 14, my parents went out with their friends, and I was left home alone for the night. I was fine that day. It was dark and I was alone, but I wasn't afraid or anxious at all. So the fact that I saw something confused me. I was in the kitchen and I had just turned the light off, leaving the room, when I saw the window. There was something at the window. A shadow. But no, it was much darker than a shadow. And it looked human, but wrong, with long skinny limbs and a slim body and head. But it had no face. It was just darkness that blocked out all light. My heart stopped for a second when I saw it. I felt fear like never before. Whenever I had these stupid visions, I never saw anything like this. Then I could feel it. It noticed me looking at it. I can't tell you how I knew what it was thinking or feeling, despite it not having any facial features to base it on. I only knew that I could tell. It was surprised I could see it. Then, after a few seconds, that surprise turned into a feeling of joy. Not the kind of joy you get when you can finally talk to someone, but the joy of finding a new toy. I ran quick as I could to my room, slamming the door and feeling panicked, but I didn't hear anything outside. I began to calm down after a while. I blamed it on my phobia, chalking it up to breaking Rule 1 as a special occasion or something. A few months later, I was filming with my friends for a school project. I was calm and surrounded by friends, but it was at night, so it was very dark. Of course, I saw nothing for most of it, but at one point, when my friends were talking, I looked at the window, and there it was, the same figure again, and once again it was looking at me. I felt my heart beating too fast, felt its joy as it saw the fear in me, as if looking through my soul. It had just broken another rule. I wasn't alone this time. Around then I realized I wasn't making this up in my head, because it began to walk towards the open window as if it was going to come inside. I ran to the window and closed it quickly. My friends were confused about why I did that, and I made the excuse that we were letting the air out, or some nonsense that parents use to close windows, and they laughed at me but were fine with it. When I turned back, it was gone, so I calmed myself down. But that image of a solid, dark creature moving toward me broke everything I knew about my random visions. Once again, like an idiot, I slowly convinced myself I was just being a coward, that it wasn't real, it couldn't be, that I was just getting worse. Yet, after that, nothing happened for some time. It was the only living shadow, till then, that didn't follow my rules. About a year passed by before I saw it again. Like the first experience, I was home alone. I'd gone to the kitchen to grab a drink. I was just closing the fridge when I noticed it. The complete lack of sounds. No humming fridge, no bugs buzzing outside, none of our cats meowing, which they always do. It was a dead and eerie silence. I looked around, my pulse quickening. I was trying to figure out what caused this silence. I wish I had just gone back to my room. In the corner, I found it, staring at me. I froze then, unable to move. It was much taller than I previously thought. It had to duck a bit to keep from hitting the ceiling, so this thing was extremely tall. As I stood there, still not moving, staring at this thing, hoping it wasn't real and would just fade away like the other illusions did. No, it began to walk towards me. Muscle control returned, and I bolted toward my room. This time I definitely heard it. Footsteps, loud ones, behind me as I ran. I threw my water at it to slow it down, but it went through it, as if it wasn't there. I ran hard and got to my room, light filling my sight as I jumped onto my bed and pulled a weapon off my wall, brandishing it, ready to either kill it or die trying. My fight-or-flight instinct was so high at that moment. Can you blame me? I had no place to run. My adrenaline was at max. Then I saw it. It crawled through the hallway, head and arms first. Then it did something I wish I could forget, something I wish I could erase from my mind. It smiled at me. I thought it was dark before, but something like the void itself appeared in its face, making two dark eyes and a smile that went from ear to ear, with a mouth full of jagged teeth, and it appeared happy at my fear, or mocking me for grabbing a weapon as if I was some coward. And I think both of us knew that that weapon was not going to do much. It began to laugh then. At least I think it was a laugh, but sounded more like water and blood rising up in someone's throat. It sent shivers down my spine. I was so relieved to be in the light, where I assumed it couldn't go. But I was wrong about that too. Its hand reached around the hallway wall, straight into the light, breaking the one rule I thought shadows could never. It walked into the light. I've never been so afraid. Finally, as if done playing with me, it crawled back and left me there. I stayed like I was for a few more minutes, before getting up, closing my door, and locking it. I was terrified. I couldn't stay in that room. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I don't know why I did this. Maybe it was stupid, but I was young and scared. I grabbed a knife and a flashlight and bolted to my car, which I had just gotten that month. I got in with no issues and closed and locked the door, but when I looked up, it was there, standing by a nearby light. I could feel it was now annoyed with me, knowing that I was trying to leave, annoyed that its toy would no longer play with it. The thing rushed at my car as I started it, and I began to back up. I heard this growl or scream. I can't really tell which one fits it better, but that noise came out of the thing's mouth. As I drove away, it chased me roughly a mile before giving up. I waited at a busy gas station until my parents were ready for me to grab them from their event. After that day, I didn't see the figure again. I assumed it was mad at me for trying to leave. Maybe it just got bored. Whatever it wasn't just my mind messing with me. It was no hallucination. It was something very real, something tormenting me for the fun of it. My fear got a lot worse after that. I can't even step outside the house at night if there's no light. I hope that if anyone sees this and it ends up hunting you, please just run. Because no matter what you do, you cannot kill a shadow. It learned from us. From That Outdoors Lover 5577. I'm 23 and live in England, but I was 11 years old when this story took place. It happened in May of 2014, when I was on holiday in Cornwall with my mom and grandparents. We were staying in a place I will leave unnamed, but for the story, all you need to know is that it was near Truro. So let's begin. My mom's parents, my grandparents, were in Truro, near where we were staying, so we decided to go to Goonhilly Reserves. Goonhilly is a World War II communication site. It has gargantuan satellite dishes you can see from miles around. It was a nice drive, the fields, the woods, and listening to a scary story on audiobook. We arrived and parked the car. It was a bright and sunny day. We were walking the trail, so imagine open fields, bright sunshine, trees lining the side of the trail. We had been walking for about 10 minutes when I noticed, just to the side of the trail, an entrance leading into a concrete, graffiti-covered square building. I looked at my mom. She nodded, so we went in. Inside this concrete structure, it was cold and dry. It seemed to have its own micro-environment inside. After you entered, there was a hallway running from left to right, with loads of plants growing all over the walls and floor. To the right was a stairway made of metal, with more hallways underneath. I went up and realized it was quite a big building. Also, a little side note. There were signs on the roof that said the building we were in was the World War II Dry Tree Site, a secret Royal Air Force early warning radar station built in 1940. But back to the story. I looked around and saw nothing but wilderness. But suddenly, this paranoia kicked in. I walked back down and looked down the hallway. Mom was standing in the inner door with my dog Winnie, a Shih Tzu breed. Then I saw the gutter, and my heart stopped. Because there, tucked in amongst the dry leaves and empty sweet wrappers, was a carving knife, covered in blood. A few yards down the hall was a door, pitch black inside. I looked in, and then I heard this sound. A ripping noise. But not just any ripping noise, but meat being torn. Because in that room, there was something there. Something that looked like a man and sat like a man, but obviously was not. It was tall, skinny, and deathly pale. It sat in the corner, only just illuminated by the light through a door, crouched over, eating something red and dripping. That's where the noise had come from. That's why that knife was there and covered in blood. The idea of something that wasn't human, using tools, that freaked me out, and I was already losing my mind at whatever this thing was. I immediately ran out of the room and into the hall once again. I put on a poker face, just telling her the room was empty and that we should leave to continue the walk. My mom didn't suspect anything. Good, but I eventually did tell her what I saw. After we left the building, I was on edge for the rest of the journey. We passed a few more buildings, some greatly hidden, some just laid out in the open. Seeing the giant satellite snapped me out of my trance for a couple of seconds. I guess gazing up at the beautiful things must have put me in awe. This is basically the end of the story. But I'll tell you this. When climbing back into my mom's car, I saw that thing again, watching me from the top of the same building. I didn't say a word for about 15 minutes. When my mom asked what was wrong, I spilled the beans entirely. She didn't believe me, saying, and I quote, "You would have told me about it sooner." But I know what I saw. If you ever hear meat ripping in some building, you'd better leave before something notices you. It knocked on my wall. From I'm Addicted to Black Coffee. I've been listening to this podcast for a while. I know the story I'm about to share is on the shorter side and probably won't scare most people. But it's been over a year now since it happened, and I still have not been able to come up with an explanation. I'm not a skeptic per se, but I always try to think of every possibility and get all the data I can before coming to a conclusion. So if anyone has any idea as to what might have caused this, please let me know. Just over a year ago, me and my family went to stay in a cabin we found on Airbnb in a little tourist town. It's out in the middle of the woods and bear country. It takes at least half an hour of driving through dirt roads on steep hills and rocks to get to a store, and another half hour to get to the small town. My room was the attic. It was very nice, with a pool table and a dartboard. A teenage boy's dream, really. The only downside was that you had to climb up a long flight of stairs to get to it. My room had bunk beds, and the morning this happened, I was sitting on the top bunk. On the other side of one of the walls is a locked room, one that the family who owned the house kept their things in when renting it. The other wall had the forest right outside. I was up early, can't remember why, but it was around 5 in the morning. I was sitting on the blankets reading a book, which I'd gotten from a store the previous day. Suddenly there was a loud knock on the wall, right by my bed, not even 5 feet from the foot of my bed. It was so loud I swear I saw the wall shake. It wasn't like a person knocking, it was too loud, too intense for that. It was like someone threw a weight at the wall, only that would have sounded like a thud, not the sound of someone rapping their knuckles on wood. It was almost like someone was asking to enter, but there was no door there, just a wooden wall. I jumped and shook for a few minutes after. As I mentioned, I was in the attic, far, far up from the ground, and so was that locked room. I asked my family about it at breakfast, but they brushed me off. I asked my sister, who is a few years older than me, and the only other one who had a chance of being awake that early in the morning. Her room was near mine, just at the foot of the stairs on ground level. I asked if she had heard it. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something like, "I'm not sure. I don't know if I was awake then." I know that she couldn't have made that knock. She was too far away, and the only possibilities I can think of are that something very, very tall knocked on my wall at 5 in the morning, or that something in that locked room did it. I've talked to my partner about this experience. He doesn't have an explanation either. It still keeps me up at night, wondering what knocked on my wall and why it did. This is the only experience I've had like this. I desperately hope someone has some idea what happened that morning, because I sure as hell don't. The Hill. From Anonymous. I've never put this story to paper before. Of the small circle of people I've related to, they've all said they would pay me not to hear it a second time. I was born and raised smack dab in the middle of Maryland, a truly excellent place to grow up in and get a head start on life. Throughout my childhood, I heard stories of a place up in the hills not far away from the part of my hometown I lived in. Strange and unsettling stories, with several of them having an absolutely evil note to them. For the sake and safety of those reading this, I would not like to give the proper name, or even the nickname of this location, as I cannot discourage people enough from going there, no matter what you believe about the supernatural. Although anyone who grew up in this area of a relatively small state, or anyone with an interest in such things, will probably know or be able to find out the true name. So for the sake of my story, I'll refer to it as The Hill, as it does indeed lie upon one of the aforementioned hills. The true part of its history is that the hill was the site of a former Catholic seminary, which operated from the late 19th century until sometime in the early 70s, when it was then closed and abandoned for a myriad of reasons. Fast forward about 25 years, and much of what was left of the derelict property was gutted by a mysterious fire, leaving nothing but the haunting bones of 1800s infrastructure. At some point afterward, so many people made their way up the hill to explore that the property owners employed a security guard and his dogs. The guard was subsequently arrested and charged with battery after brutally assaulting a trespasser with the butt of his firearm. In the decades since its abandonment and destruction, many tales have been told about the hill that cause reactions ranging from skeptical laughs to blood running cold. Stories of satanic activity, animal sacrifices, faces in the trees, disembodied voices, and mysterious lights. Speaking for myself and a former student of my father's, those stories came true. My father works in teaching. He's one of those teachers who become so influential and fatherly in young people's lives that they still come back years, often decades later, to see him. He, like myself, is a very devout Catholic, and having grown up in the same area, he had heard the stories about the hill, and had always warned me to stay away from that place, whether I thought the stories were true or not. One day, when I was in middle school, he came home and told me about an experience one of his students had regarding a trip up to the hill with his friends. They went up one night to explore and drink, and while there, this student said he had this nagging feeling of unease, as if a malicious intent was bent upon him. He chalked it up to nerves and the creepiness of the woods at night, and left with his buddies. A few days later, he noticed that his pets would not come near him, and if he attempted to get close to them, they would growl or hiss aggressively. He then began having nightmares about faces he could not make out, but that he knew were watching him, and would wake up with bruises and scratches that stung like salt had been rubbed in them. Finally, one day, he told my father, as he was driving down the road, he almost thought he felt a weight suddenly materialize on the back of his car, and when he looked in the rearview mirror, he said he almost careened into the opposite lane of traffic out of shock and horror. He described a face unlike anything that naturally walks the earth, green and scaly, with yellow reptilian eyes, and it was attached to his trunk with a vice-like grip. He was able to pull over, and once he emerged from the car, the being was gone. But there were dents on either side of the trunk, like powerful hands had squeezed the metal like putty. My father asked him if he felt comfortable making a sketch of it, and once the student had, my father said to me that even the rough, unskilled drawing made him feel more uncomfortable than he would have cared to admit. He immediately phoned a very close priest friend of his, and the priest blessed the student, telling him things he could do to combat negative feelings or presences if they persisted. I have no idea if the student ever saw this entity again, but it's safe to say the story scared me away from any desire to go up the hill, at least for a while. Fast forward to spring break of 2018. I'd gone home and was out fishing with a friend at a nearby pond. This was mid-March. It was a spectacular day, 74 degrees and sunny. After a while and a few beers, I suggested we go check out an old decrepit paper mill along the river, not far from the hill. That too was a popular urban exploration spot, albeit lacking the same mystery of its sinister neighbor. At some point, I looked up the ridge and knew that we were not far from that old property, which is why I suggested it. To my surprise, my buddy, who can usually be somewhat of a scaredy cat, agreed. The pedestrian path up to the hill is marked by a long, overgrown staircase made of granite. Once you reach the top, the woods are speckled with relics and monuments of the long-gone seminary. Foundations, hollowed-out buildings, corner posts, and a heavily graffitied altar. I'd looked up some of these online, and had found that somewhere through a tunnel cut into the bushes, there was a car graveyard, full of the skeletons of old Hudsons, Fords, and T-Birds. We actually managed to find said tunnel, but at this point my friend said that he did not feel right about continuing, and wanted to leave. I pressured him into this one last venture, and we went through the brush. Indeed, on the other side was said graveyard. It was quite impressive to see just how many vehicles had made their way up there and just died. It was then that out of nowhere, a fierce cold enveloped us like an invisible cell, and on this 74-degree sunny day, our breath began to come out in thick wisps like it was the middle of winter. We were creeped out and quickly made our way out, back towards the stairs. As we passed by the altar, I suddenly stopped, and I felt as if an arm had wrapped itself around my midsection. I felt the strongest urge imaginable that I should return to the car graveyard. My deepest consciousness knew that I did not want to, but something else was almost pleading with me that I should go back. My buddy then grabbed me and brought me out of this sort of trance, explaining that when he looked back at me just now, there was a quick flash on my face, as if I had aged 100 years in a second. That was more than enough for us, so we got back to our car quickly, and we've never gone anywhere near the hill since. Even as I write this, I can feel that cold we felt. Sure, my story is not as viscerally frightening as my father's students, but nonetheless, they're both cautionary accounts. Do not investigate this location. I implore you to never go up the hill. I have no doubts that whatever energy or supernatural influence is up there is an evil one. It's not worth jeopardizing yourself or your friends merely for a peek into local history. The hill is where it belongs, in the past. Be content to let it stay there. I like the name, The Hill. Like this very haunted evil place is also a metaphor for a treacherous upward journey. For me, all I heard was how old I'm getting. That's my upward journey. I miss when I could wake up in my bed without feeling half dead in the morning. That's another upward journey, getting up from my bed. Good night. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails, and you can send me your scary true stories of the unknown at darkstories.org. If you want to support what I do, check out Erie.fm, where you can sign up for premium membership to get bonus stories, members-only audiobooks, and 0 ads. You can also support us for free and get some folklore-related content by watching and subscribing to the Freaky Folklore YouTube channel. Just go on YouTube and look up Freaky Folklore. If you see a cute little character with antlers, you've come to the right place. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. As a horror narrator, sometimes a story gets sent to me that's a bit too short or a bit too long, so it's hard to fit into an upcoming script. And because of that, sometimes it sits in my inbox for weeks, months, even years, and I end up forgetting about it. This is one such story, and when I read it, I was horrified. Partially because I'd let it sit for so long, but mostly because it was marked as a true story. People change names, even locations, when they share their true stories. Others often outright fake their stories. What I'm about to share with you has no title, and the author was completely anonymous. I'll leave it up to you to decide whether you believe this or not, but it may be the most terrifying skinwalker story on the internet. There were 2 times in my life where I was certain I was dealing with a skinwalker. Not the internet kind, not the Hollywood version. I'm talking about the real thing, the Yi Nod Lushi. The kind my grandfather warned us about when my parents weren't around. The kind that makes Navajo elders go quiet and change the subject. The first time, I was 10 years old, and it wore my dog's skin. The second time, I was in my mid-20s, and it wore the skin of a man I helped rescue from the high desert outside Cortez, Colorado. I'm going to tell you both stories, because I believe they might be connected in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. They both still keep me up at night. My name is Mason. I'm Navajo on my mother's side, and I grew up splitting time between Tulsa and Window Rock, Arizona. For 15 years, I worked as a wilderness EMT and volunteer search and rescue coordinator for San Juan County. I've seen people die in the back country, and I've found bodies that had been out there for weeks. I've dealt with hypothermia, rattlesnake bites, falls from cliff faces, and one particularly bad encounter with a mountain lion. But nothing prepared me for what I found during that search in 2006. Let me start at the beginning, with the first time. I was 10 years old the summer my grandfather told me the story. This would have been 1991 in late July, hot enough that you couldn't walk barefoot on the dirt roads around Window Rock. Kent and I were staying with our grandparents for 2 weeks while our parents took what Dad called a much-needed vacation. Kent was 8 years old then, all knobby knees and questions. He'd follow me around like a shadow, trying to do everything I did. Most of the time, it annoyed me, but at our grandparents' house, I didn't mind as much. The place felt too big at night, with more dark corners and creaky boards than I cared for. Grandfather didn't tell stories the way white people do. He'd mention things in passing, dropping pieces of information, and you'd have to pay attention or you would miss it. Most of the time, he'd be doing something else, like fixing a fence or working on his truck, cleaning his rifle, and a story might just come out. That day, he was skinning a rabbit he'd shot that morning. I was sitting on an overturned bucket watching him work. Kent was inside with grandmother, helping her make fry bread, or more likely, getting in her way while she fed him pieces of dough. "You know why we don't whistle at night?" Grandfather asked me. I shook my head. It was something I'd been told not to do, but no one really explained why. "Whistling calls things that listen." He made a precise cut, peeling back the hide. His hands never shook, even though he was well into his 70s. "Most of the time, nothing answers, but sometimes something does." He didn't look at me. He kept working. "My grandfather told me about a man from Chinle. This was a long time ago, before the long walk, maybe before that. This man, he wanted power, wanted to live forever and to do things normal people can't do. So he learned the dark way, killed his own brother to do it, wore his skin until it became his. After that, he could wear anything's skin. Coyote, owl, deer, even other people." I remember my mouth going dry. "Did they catch him?" "No, things like that, you don't catch them. You avoid them. You don't say their name, and you don't whistle at night. You keep your windows closed and your doors locked, and you never invite something inside." He finally looked at me. "And if you see something that doesn't move right, that doesn't sound right, even if it looks like someone you know. You run. You understand me? Yes, sir. I mean it, Mason. You see your brother, your mother, your father, and something feels wrong. You run, because it's not them anymore. He went back to the rabbit. We didn't talk about it again that day, but that night I lay awake in the small bedroom I shared with Kent, listening to every creak and groan of my grandparents' house. The window was open. It was too hot to close it, and I stared at the gap in the curtains, scared I'd see something looking back. Kent was asleep in the other bed, breathing steady. He could sleep through anything, that kid. I envied him that. And then, something scratched at the window screen. I went rigid. The scratching came again, like nails dragging across metal mesh, testing it. Then it stopped. I heard breathing on the other side of the screen, heavy and wet, like a dog had been running, but not a dog. I wanted to get up to close the window, but I didn't dare move. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but maybe it was only a couple of minutes. Then there were footsteps, padding away through the dirt. I pulled the covers over my head and prayed. Eventually, I fell asleep. The following night, it came back. Around the same time, I'd been watching the clock. 2:47 a.m. The scratching was louder this time and more persistent. There was a smell with it now, seeping through the screen. Reminded me of roadkill long forgotten in the summer sun. Kent stirred in his bed. Mason, what's that smell? Go back to sleep, I whispered. Is there someone outside? Just go back to sleep. That was when the scratching stopped, but then there was a voice. Let me in. It sounded like grandmother, but not quite. Kent sat up then. Was that? I flew out of bed and slammed the window shut, locking it. Whatever was outside made a sound. Not quite a laugh, but not quite a growl either. Then it moved away. In the morning, there were claw marks on the screen. Deep ones, like something had tried to tear through. The frame was bent where something had pushed against it. Grandfather saw this when he came to wake us up. He didn't say a word about it. He just got his tools and replaced the screen. That night and every night after, the windows stayed closed. He burned sage in our room, leaving a line of ash on the windowsill. A couple of nights later, we heard it walking on the roof. Heavy footsteps, too heavy for any animal that should be up there. It stopped right above our room. Kent was crying quietly in his bed, trying not to make any noise. I wanted to comfort him, but I couldn't move. I was too scared to speak. We lay there listening to it pace back and forth until sunrise. In the morning, Grandfather found tracks in the dirt around the house. He would not tell us what kind. He spent the day making protection bundles, hanging them above every door and window. Whatever it was, it didn't come back. Not to that house anyway. 3 weeks later, our dog went missing. His name was Checkers, a mutt we'd had since I was 6. He had these black and white patches and floppy ears, the kind of dog that never met a person he didn't love. Kent had picked him out from a litter at the pound. Checkers slept in my room, followed me everywhere, and would steal food right off your plate if you weren't watching. He disappeared on a Tuesday night. We had let him out to pee around 9 o'clock. Dad opened the back door and Checkers trotted out, tail wagging like it always did. We were watching TV, some sitcom my mom liked. About 10 minutes passed, then 15, and Dad went to call him back in. Checkers, come on, boy! Nothing. Dad grabbed a flashlight, and went out to look. I could hear him calling from different parts of the yard, his voice getting more concerned every few minutes. After about 20 more minutes, he came back in. I can't find him. He must have gotten out somehow. Think he found a gap in the fence somewhere. But I'd been playing in the backyard that afternoon. I never found a gap. We spent the next 3 hours searching the neighborhood. Mom drove slowly through the streets while Kent and I called out the windows. Dad walked with his flashlight, checking under cars and bushes. Our neighbors came out to help. Someone from 2 houses down said he'd seen Checkers around 9:15 sniffing around in garbage cans. But that was it. I didn't sleep that night. I kept going over to the window, hoping to see him sitting on the porch. Kent cried himself to sleep. I heard Mom and Dad talking quietly downstairs until nearly 2 in the morning. The next day, we made flyers. Mom drove Kent and me to Kinko's, printing out 50 copies with Checker's picture. The one from last Christmas where he was wearing the stupid Santa hat Kent had put on him. It read, "Missing dog, family pet, reward," and we put our phone number on the bottom. We spent the afternoon putting them up, on every telephone pole, every stop sign, even the grocery store bulletin board in the vet's office. Kent would knock on doors while I stood behind him, watching him explain to each neighbor about our missing dog. His voice would crack when he described Checkers. He was trying so hard to be brave. "He's really friendly," Kent would say. "He won't bite or anything. If you see him, could you call us, please?" An old lady said she would keep an eye out. The teenagers at the corner house barely looked up from their video games. And one kind woman gave us cookies, promising to check the shed. Days passed. Every time the phone rang, I'd run for it, hoping. But it was never about Checkers. Mom kept saying he'd come back on his own. The dogs have a fantastic sense of direction. But by the 4th day, even she stopped saying that. Kent barely ate. He'd sit by the back door after school, watching and waiting. I caught him leaving bits of his sandwich on the back porch. Checker's favorite, peanut butter and jelly. "He'll smell it," Kent said when he saw me watching. "He'll know we're waiting for him." A week went by. The flyers started to fade in the sun by then. Mom gently suggested maybe we should think about visiting the pound, see if there were any puppies that needed homes. Kent ran to his room and slammed the door. I heard him sobbing through the walls. Then there was the false hope. Someone called on day 10, saying she'd seen a black and white dog in the park. We ran there. Kent was still in his pajamas. But it was someone else's dog. A female with different markings. Kent's face when he realized. I'll never forget that. It was like something broke inside him. 12 days after Checkers disappeared, he came back. I was the one who found him. Early in the morning, with barely any light out, I'd gotten up to use the bathroom and happened to glance out the living room window. And there was Checkers, sitting on our front porch, staring at the door. I should have been happy. I should have run to let him inside. But I didn't, because something was wrong. He was sitting extremely still, like a statue. Dogs, especially ones like Checkers, don't sit that still. Checkers couldn't hold still if you paid him to. And he wasn't panting when it was already hot out. No, his mouth was closed. Dogs pant, it's what they do, but Checkers was just sitting there, watching the door. And he was so clean. A dog missing for 12 days should be dirty, matted up, maybe even skinnier. But his coat looked perfect, groomed even. He was cleaner than when he'd left. I stood at the window for a long time, at least 5 minutes, maybe more. He didn't move, didn't scratch at the door, and didn't whine. He sat there staring, occasionally tilting his head, as if curious. Then Mom came down the stairs. "Mason, what are you doing up?" "Checkers is back," I said. She rushed to the window, made a happy sound, and headed for the door. I grabbed her arm. "Wait." "What, honey? He's been gone almost 2 weeks." The dog stood up then. The way he moved was very peculiar. It's hard to explain better than that. Like the actors and puppeteers on Sesame Street trying to handle a puppet. His back legs locked, then his front legs, and he sort of levered himself upright instead of standing the way dogs stand. Mom hesitated. His head swiveled toward her. Not turned, but more like a swivel, and his eyes were weird too. Dogs' eyes catch the light. But Checker's eyes that morning were flat black. Mom opened the door. "Mom, don't." But she was already reaching for him. Her hand touched his head, and that's when he moved, faster than I'd ever seen Checkers move. He snapped at her, teeth clicking together an inch from her fingers. She jerked back with a yelp. "Jesus Christ!" Dad's voice came from behind us. He was on the stairs in his boxers and a t-shirt. "Back up from the door, now!" he commanded. Mom stumbled back. The thing that looked like Checkers took a step forward, crossing the threshold into our house. Its mouth opened, wide, and I heard a sound that should have never come from a dog. It sounded like my name. Dad grabbed the bat he kept by the front door. "Get out!" he shouted at it. The Checkers thing's head tilted the other way. Its mouth closed, and for a second, it almost looked like our dog again. Then it turned and walked off the porch. It was in no hurry. It just walked slowly. I watched it stop at the edge of our yard, and it tried to stand up. And I mean stand up, like a person, on its hind legs. It got about halfway, front paws hanging down, wobbling like it was trying to remember how to balance itself. It held that position for about 3 seconds, this horrific half-standing thing, before dropping back down to all fours. Then it ran, normal dog running, clearing the neighbor's fence in one bound and disappearing between the houses. We stood there in the doorway, the three of us, not saying anything. Kent showed up a minute later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Dad said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "Go back to bed." "Was that Checkers?" He'd seen it. Of course he'd seen it. "No," I said. "That wasn't Checkers." Kent looked at me, then Dad and Mom, and his face crumpled. "But it looked like him." "It wasn't him," Dad said firmly. "Checkers is gone, buddy. That was something else." "What do you mean, something else?" None of us knew how to answer that. Dad called Grandfather that morning. They talked for an hour in the kitchen while Mom kept Kent and me in the living room. Kent hadn't said a word since seeing the thing that looked like Checkers. He sat on the couch instead and stared at nothing. I could hear Dad's voice getting louder and more agitated. Mom put on cartoons, but I wasn't watching it, and neither was Kent. Finally, Dad came out. "Pack a bag. We're going to stay at a hotel tonight." "Why?" Kent asked. "Just for tonight, until Grandfather gets here." We stayed at the Holiday Inn by the highway. Dad got us a room with 2 beds and a pull-out couch. We ordered pizza, but nobody ate much. Dad kept checking the locks on the door, and Mom held Kent while he cried about Checkers. I sat by the window watching the parking lot. "What was that?" I finally asked. Dad and Mom looked at each other. Then Dad said, "We don't know." But I think he did know. They just knew better than to say it out loud. Grandfather arrived the next morning. He brought some stuff with him. Herbs I didn't recognize, some small bundles wrapped in cloth, a jar of something that looked like ash mixed with dirt. We went back to the house. Dad went in first, checking every room while we waited in the car. When he gave the all clear, Grandfather got to work. He did not explain what he was doing, but he went through the house room by room, marking door frames and windowsills, burning dried plants that filled the house with thick smoke. Mom opened all the windows to air it out, but the smell lingered for days. I wondered if it was the same sage he burned at the window that night. When he was done, he sat all of us down in the living room. Kent and I were on the couch, and Mom and Dad were in the chairs. He stood in front of us. "Whatever came to your door yesterday, it's gone now. It won't come back. But you need to understand something." He looked at each of us in turn. "That was not your dog. Your dog died out there somewhere, and something else is wearing its skin. Maybe it's been wearing that skin for days. Maybe it was waiting for the right time to come back. But it's not Checkers. Checkers is gone." Even Mom cried then. I felt my eyes burning, but I didn't let the tears out. Kent was staring at the floor. "There are things out there," Grandfather continued. "Old things. Things that learned dark medicine a long time ago and wear animal skins and become those animals. Some of them wear human skin too. They're drawn to weakness, grief, fear. That's when they're most dangerous." "Why did it come here?" Dad asked. "I don't know. Maybe it was just hungry. Maybe it was curious. Maybe something drew it." He paused. "But it said Mason's name. That means it was watching you and learning. If I had not come, if you had let it stay this way, it would have tried again. And eventually, you would have let it in." "How do you know?" I asked. "Because that is what they do. They wait and they watch and they learn how to be what you want them to be. And then, when you're not paying attention, that's when they take you." That night, Mom and Dad sat in the kitchen, talking amongst themselves, an all too familiar sound these days. I couldn't hear everything, but I did catch pieces. "Can't be real." "Saw it. We all saw it." "Rational explanation." "Stood up. It tried to stand up like a man." "The boys are scared." "Should be scared. I'm scared." They talked until almost midnight. In the end, they decided not to talk about it anymore, to pretend it never happened, to tell people Checkers had been hit by a car if anyone asked about the flyers. We burned Checkers' collar that night in the backyard. Grandfather said that part was important, that we needed to let go completely. Kent cried. I didn't. I'd already said goodbye to the real Checkers days ago. Whatever that thing was on our porch, it wasn't my dog. For months afterward, I had nightmares. I would dream that Checkers came back again and that we let him inside, that I woke up to find him standing at the foot of my bed, eyes flat and black. In those dreams, he would open his mouth wide and say my name. Mason. Kent had nightmares too. I could tell because I heard him whimpering in his sleep and calling out. He started to sleep with the lights on, and he would start checking under his bed before getting in. Even though we were just kids, he never wanted or asked for another dog. Neither did I. The nightmares eventually did stop, or maybe they just became less frequent. I learned to live with what I'd seen, packed it away in that part of your brain where you keep things you don't want to think about. Years passed. I grew up and went to college, got my EMT certification, and started to work search and rescue. Kent got married and had kids before me, and life went on. I almost forgot about Checkers, almost convinced myself it had been some kind of rabid animal, that my 10-year-old brain had exaggerated the details. But then, about a decade and a half later, I got a call about a missing hiker in the Four Corners area, and everything I'd tried to forget came screaming back. Because when we found him, when I saw his face and looked into his eyes, I knew what he was. And I knew I'd made a terrible mistake bringing him home. The call came in at 4:47 a.m. on a Saturday in October 2006. I was already awake. I hadn't been sleeping well since my divorce. Yep, 26 years old then, and I was already divorced. My phone lit up with Tom's number. He was a San Juan County SAR coordinator, former park ranger, and the kind of guy who'd been doing this for 25 years and had seen everything. If he was calling before sunrise, somebody was in real trouble.
Hey Mason, we've got a missing hiker. Navajo male, 32 years old. Name's Joseph Binnelly. Went out solo hiking Thursday afternoon near the Sleeping Ute Mountain Trail System. Was supposed to check in with his wife yesterday. She called it in last night when he didn't come home.
I was already pulling on my pants. Weather?
A cold front moved through yesterday evening. Temps dropped to the low 30s last night. He's got gear according to his wife, but we're looking at 48 hours exposure minimum.
I'll be at the staging area in 30.
Make it 20. We're losing daylight.
Well, he was gonna have to settle. I made it in 25. The staging area was a dirt lot off the highway, where it curved past the New Mexico border. 5 trucks were already there. People from the sheriff's office, Mark Webb with his tracking dog, Tom's old Ford, a couple of volunteers I knew by face but not by name. Tom was spreading a topographical map across the hood of his truck when I walked up. The man looked tired. Then again, Tom always looked tired. 25 years of pulling bodies out of the wilderness will do that to you.
Mason, good.
You know the Sleeping Ute trails?
Well enough.
What's our search grid? He pointed to a section of the map marked in red.
Wife says he was planning a day hike, probably this loop here. 8 miles, moderate difficulty. Should have been back by dark Thursday. His truck's still at the trailhead, keys locked inside. We checked. No sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle, just gone.
Has he done this trail before?
Wife says he hikes up here once a month, knows the area. He's experienced.
Tom paused and rubbed his jaw.
But here's the thing. 2 ranchers reported livestock killings in this area over the past week. 3 calves mutilated. They'd been opened up, organs taken out. Navajo Nation police sent someone out but couldn't make sense of it.
That sent some chills down my spine. Predators?
That's what they're calling it officially, but the ranchers are spooked. One of them said he found tracks near the kill site and claimed they were human footprints. They went all the way up to a barbed wire fence, then disappeared. Said there was nothing but coyote prints on the other side.
One of the volunteers, a woman named Sarah, came up and adjusted her radio. We ready to head out? Every minute counts in this cold. We divided into 3 teams. I was paired with Sarah and Mark Webb. Mark and his dog would take point. Sarah and I would cover the flanks. Tom took a volunteer firefighter named Bill and headed north. The others went to cover the eastern grid. The trail began as a well-maintained path with clear markers. The morning air was crisp. There was frost still clinging to the shadowed areas. But as we climbed higher, the terrain got rougher, with loose scree, steep drop-offs, and sections where the trail narrowed to barely 2 feet wide, with nothing but air on one side. About a mile in, we found the first strange thing. It was a dead raven, perfectly intact, lying right in the middle of the trail. There were no wounds or signs of what killed it. Mark's dog, Bear, wouldn't go near it either. In fact, he stood there whining until Mark picked it up with a stick and tossed it into the brush. "That's weird," Sarah said. "Ravens don't often drop dead like that." Half a mile later, we found 3 more, all arranged in a rough line across the trail.
Poison, maybe? Mark suggested. I wasn't sure about that. Bear had Joseph Binnelly's scent from a jacket his wife provided. The dog was good at his job, nose down, moving steadily up the trail. But 2 miles in, he stopped. Just stopped dead, head up, ears forward. Bear? Mark moved up beside him. What is it, boy? The dog whined. Not his normal working sound. This was high-pitched, anxious. He took 2 steps backward, away from something up the trail. Strange, Mark said. He's been acting weird all day. Doesn't usually spook easy. I mean it. He tracked through a mountain lion's territory last month without batting an eye. Sarah had her hand on the radio then. Maybe he's picking up on a predator. But Bear wasn't acting like he'd scented a predator. Poor dog looked terrified. Let me check ahead, I said, and moved up past them. The trail curved around a boulder the size of a car. I rounded it, then stopped. There was a smell, not strong but distinct, a coppery and herby smell. Something else too, reminded me of dead deer. And as I had rounded that boulder, the temperature seemed to drop. Maybe like 10 degrees colder in this one spot. But there was no shade here, no reason for that to happen. My hand moved to the knife on my belt without me even thinking. Mason? Sarah called. See anything? Nothing, I said. Just hold on. The dirt ahead looked disturbed. Not footprints exactly, but like something had been dragged across it recently. The disturbance went off the trail and into the trees, then came back, then continued up the path. Whatever made it had been moving in circles, like it was confused, or like it was playing. We should mark this location. Sarah came around the boulder. Mark what? I don't see anything. I looked again. She was right. Staring back at the dirt, it was normal now, just a regular trail. The disturbance I swear that I saw was gone, but that smell and the cold spot were still there. We continued up. Bear eventually started to work again, but he stayed close to Mark, kept his tail low, looking back over his shoulder every few steps. 3 miles in, we found the first piece of evidence. A water bottle, partially buried under fallen leaves. The label matched the brand Joseph's wife said he carried. Okay, Tom's voice crackled over the radio. We've got scent. Tighten the search grid. He's in this area somewhere. But the water bottle bothered me. It seemed to have been placed carefully. Not dropped or discarded, but placed there, with the cap on, sitting upright under those leaves, like someone had arranged it, as if someone wanted us to find it. The next 2 miles were harder going. The trail deteriorated into barely more than a game path. We had to use our hands to scramble over rocky sections. Sarah slipped once and caught herself on a pine branch. When she pulled her hand back, there was blood on her palm. Not from thorns, but from tiny-looking cuts, like the branch had been sharp as glass. What the hell? She took a closer look at the branch. It looked fine, but when she touched it again more carefully, it cut her finger, just like that. Ow, that's not normal. All the vegetation in this area was like that. It looked normal, but it was wrong when you looked closer or touched it. When Mark tried to push through some bushes, he jerked back. His jacket had been torn in 3 places. More carefully now, we pushed deeper into the high country. I started to notice other things. The further out we got, the fewer birds sang, fewer insects made sounds, and before long, it had all died down, leaving this claustrophobic stillness that made every sound we made seem too loud. At 10:23 a.m., Mark's radio crackled. Team 2 has contact. We found him, North Ridge near the Box Canyon. He's alive. Relief flooded through me. Alive. We'd found him alive. Condition? Tom asked. There was a pause. Then, he's, walking. Looks disoriented but mobile. We're bringing him down now. We altered course to meet up with Team 2. It took 40 minutes of hard hiking through rough terrain. I was becoming more anxious by the second. This forest did not want us here, and for what reason I did not know. When Sarah grabbed my arm suddenly, I nearly shouted. She said, "Mason, look at that." She pointed to a tree ahead of us. There were handprints on the bark about 7 feet up. Human-shaped handprints, pressed deep into the wood like the tree had been soft when they were made. But that was an old tree. Had to be 50 years old at least. Make that make sense. When we finally reached them, I saw Joseph Binnelly for the first time. He was sitting on a rock, wrapped in an emergency blanket, drinking from a canteen. He was in his mid-30s, average height, black hair pulled back in a ponytail. He looked tired, but otherwise unhurt. No visible injuries, no signs of exposure. His clothes were clean. That struck me as odd. 2 days in the wilderness, and his pants looked fresh. No dirt, no tears, nothing. Dave from Team 2 was talking to him. "Just stay calm, we're gonna get you checked out and get you back to your wife." "I'm fine," Joseph said. His voice was somewhat emotionless. Just got turned around. Lost track of time. "You've been out here 2 nights, buddy," Dave said. "Temperature dropped below freezing, too. We've got to get you checked for hypothermia, dehydration, and—" I said I'm fine. The way he said it made something cold settle into my stomach. There was no relief in being found in his voice. No embarrassment either at needing to be rescued. Nothing that you would expect from someone who had been lost. I moved closer to him. "Joseph, I'm Mason, Wilderness EMT. I need to do a quick check if that's okay, to make sure you're good to walk down." He looked right at me. His eyes were brown, normal size, normal color, but there was something missing behind them, like looking at a photograph of a person instead of the person themselves. "Sure, whatever you need," he said. I knelt down in front of him, pulling out my pin light. "Look straight ahead, please. I'm gonna check your pupils." He stared forward. I shone the light in his right eye, then his left. His pupils constricted, a normal response. But his eyes didn't water, and he didn't blink. His eyes stayed fixed on a point over my shoulder. I counted in my head. 30 seconds, 40, a full minute. And the man still didn't blink. "Joseph, you can blink." He blinked immediately, like I had reminded him that he could even do that. How long have you been without water, Joseph?" I asked. "Don't know. A day, maybe." "But you're not thirsty?" "I'm fine." I checked his pulse then. 60 beats per minute. Somehow perfectly steady. Someone who had spent 2 nights in the wild would have an elevated heart rate. Stress, exhaustion, relief at being found. But his was calm, like someone just sitting on their couch. "Well, can you tell me what happened?" I asked. "How'd you get yourself lost?" "Went off trail, chasing a deer. Got confused." "You were chasing a deer?" "I wanted a photo." "For 2 days?" He blinked again, like, "Oh, let me remember to do that," kind of blink. "Lost my phone. Couldn't find the trail. Wandered." The way he spoke was so hollow, and his breath, there was something off about that too. It didn't fog in the cold air like everyone else's. I stood up. "Well, he's showing no signs of exposure. Vitals are stable. I'd like to get him down and do a more thorough check." "Sounds good," Tom said. "Let's pack up, Joseph. You feel okay to walk?" "Yes." Joseph stood up. No trouble at all, no stiffness, no soreness, just straight up. A girl named Jessica, a younger volunteer, offered him a protein bar. "You must be hungry." "No, thank you." "You haven't eaten in 2 days, right?" "I'm fine." We started the hike down then. Joseph walked in the middle of the group, flanked by Dave and Mark. I hung back with Sarah and watched.
"Do you think there's something off about this?" I asked her quietly. She shrugged. "The guy got lost and got lucky. Probably scared out of his mind but trying to play it cool." But it wasn't that. I'd seen scared hikers play tough, and this wasn't that. We'd been hiking about 20 minutes when I noticed how evenly Joseph was walking. That trail, as I said before, was rough and uneven, with rocks and roots and loose dirt. Everybody was watching their footing, occasionally stumbling, experienced SAR and volunteers. But Joseph moved like he was walking on flat ground, and not once did I see him stumble. He never adjusted his stride. It was like his feet found the perfect spot every single step without him even looking down. And he wasn't sweating. We were all sweating from the pace and the gear, everyone except Joseph. "Joseph," I called, "how's your energy? You need a break?" He turned his head to look at me. Just his head, not his shoulders, and I swear it was about 10 degrees too far for a normal person to turn comfortably. "I'm fine." "Still, we should stop. Let everyone catch their breath." Tom waved us down. We gathered in a small clearing, everyone grabbing water and checking their gear. Joseph stood apart from the group. He was staring into the trees. Mark walked over to me, Bear pressing up against his leg. "The dog won't go near him," he said quietly. "Bear's been keeping maximum distance since we found him." I then moved over next to Joseph. "Your wife's gonna be so glad to see you." No response. Joseph?" He turned to face me then, rotating his whole body this time like he'd remembered that's how people move. "Yes." "I said your wife's gonna be glad to see you." "Yes, she will be glad." Dave called out, "All right, let's keep moving. Got about 3 miles to the trailhead." We walked, but I couldn't stop watching Joseph. The more I watched, the more wrong things I noticed. Even his shadow seemed weird. Maybe I was getting paranoid and staring too long and being too judgmental. But I swear to God it seemed to lag behind him slightly, like his shadow was struggling to keep up with his form. When he stepped over a log, his shadow seemed to flow over it instead of jumping, so to speak. We were maybe a mile from the trailhead when Mark's dog started to act up again. Bear pulled hard on the leash, trying to get away from Joseph. He was whining, the fur on his back standing up. "Easy, Bear," Mark said. "What's gotten into you?" Joseph stopped walking and turned to look at the dog. Bear went silent instantly. Not calm though, but silent. His mouth was open and body tensed up, like he was still whining but without the sound. You okay, bud?" Mark said, pulling Bear closer. "He must be..." Joseph smiled. The smile didn't touch his eyes. "Dogs don't like me." "Why is that?" I asked. "They can tell." "Tell what?" "That I'm not right." The words hung in the air for a moment. Nobody spoke or replied to it. Then Joseph laughed, and it was a perfectly normal laugh, and he shook his head. "I'm joking. I got bit by a dog when I was a kid. They pick up on the fear." But he wasn't afraid. There wasn't an ounce of fear in him, and the way he suddenly talked with emotion seemed so abrupt. We kept walking. Bear stayed silent until Joseph was 30 feet ahead. Then suddenly his whining came back full force. The last half mile felt endless. The sun was high now, hot on our backs. Every time I looked at Joseph, my grandfather's words echoed in my head. "You see your brother, your mother, your father, and something feels wrong. You run, because it's not them anymore." But I couldn't run and I couldn't accuse him. Even I didn't fully believe the ideas in my head. We made it to the parking lot at 12:15 p.m. Joseph's truck was still there, keys still locked inside. Tom called his wife, letting her know we were bringing him to the medical center in Cortez for evaluation. This is standard procedure. Joseph didn't argue, and he didn't ask to go straight home. He nodded and climbed into the back of Sarah's patrol vehicle. I watched him through the window as we packed up our gear. He sat perfectly still, hands in his lap, staring straight ahead. Didn't fidget, didn't look around, but sat there. "Hell of a lucky find," Dave said, clapping me on the shoulder. "That guy could have died out there." "Yeah," I said. "Lucky." But luck had nothing to do with it. Whatever we found on that mountain, it wanted to be found. It had left that water bottle like a breadcrumb. It had waited for us, and now we were bringing it home. Sarah drove Joseph to the medical center, and I followed in my truck. The whole drive I kept thinking about calling my grandfather, but argued with myself if this really was the situation I thought it was. At the medical center, they did a full workup. I knew one of the nurses, Carla, from previous SAR operations. She was the one who took Joseph's vitals. "It's so weird," she said to me quietly while Joseph was in the bathroom. "Everything I checked was textbook the right number. Body temperature 98.6, and I checked several times with no fluctuation." She continued, "Nobody's temperature is exact. It fluctuates, and his blood pressure too. Perfect 120/8 every single time. And his heart rate is exactly 60, like someone programmed ideal vitals into a computer." The doctor, though, didn't seem at all concerned. Everything came back normal, or better than normal. Perfect even. No signs of dehydration despite 2 days without water. No hypothermia despite freezing temperatures. No elevated stress hormones. "You're very lucky," the doctor told Joseph. "Most people don't fare so well after that kind of exposure." "I'm fine," Joseph said. His wife arrived an hour later. Emily Bentley, schoolteacher, early 30s, long black hair in a braid. She rushed into the room crying and threw her arms around her husband. "Oh my God, Joseph, I was so scared. I thought—" She stopped, pulled back, and looked at his face. "Joseph?" "I'm fine," he said. You look—" She touched his cheek, and I saw her flinch slightly, like his skin was the wrong temperature, even though we had just checked. "You look different." "It's been a hard couple days." "No, you look better, younger. Did they give you something?" The doctor shook his head. "Just fluids and observation." Emily stared at her husband, confused. Their 2 kids had come in with her, a girl about 8 years old and a boy around 6. They hung back by the door, not running to their father like you'd expect. The girl, Sophie, I heard Emily call her, actually took a step backward when Joseph looked at her. "Daddy?" the boy said uncertainly. "Hello, Michael," Joseph said. The words were right, but the tone was wrong, overly formal. Emily noticed. I could see it in her face, but she pushed through it and smiled. "Let's get you home. You must be exhausted." She hugged him again. This time I saw Joseph's arms come up and wrap around her, but the kids didn't hug him at all. They discharged Joseph an hour later. As they were leaving, I overheard Sophie whisper to her mother, "Why does Daddy smell different?" "Shh, honey, he's been lost in the woods for 2 days." I watched them drive away, Emily talking while Joseph stared out the window, the kids silent in the back seat. That should have been the end of it. Missing hiker found safe, everyone goes home. Case closed. That night I stayed up sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, searching for anything that might explain what I'd seen. I found Joseph's Facebook profile. His wife posted regularly. Family photos, school events, hiking trips. I scrolled back through months of posts. The Joseph in those photos was different than the person we'd found. The same face and same build, but something essential was missing from the man we'd brought down from the mountain. The Joseph in the photo smiled with his whole face, had laugh lines around his eyes, looked at his family with warmth. The thing we brought back home had none of that. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying to rationalize it. I knew something was wrong. I thought about calling someone, Tom maybe, or my grandfather. But again, I didn't. I did nothing at all, and told myself I was being stupid. That being lost like that does different things to different people. Not everyone will handle it the same way. After all, Emily would have noticed if something was really wrong with her husband. Wouldn't have taken him home, right? I was wrong about that too. A few weeks later, I ran into Tom at the hardware store in Cortez. He was picking up fence posts. We made small talk for a few minutes about the weather and upcoming search operations. Then he said something that made my blood run cold.
Hey, you hear about the Bentley situation?
What situation?
Well, the wife called the sheriff's office and said Joseph's been acting strange since we brought him back. Wandering around at night, standing in the kids' rooms while they sleep. She woke up at 2 a.m. last week and found him just standing at the foot of the bed, staring at her. Not moving, not blinking, just staring.
Jesus, what did the sheriff say?
Tom shrugged. Not much they can do. Guy hadn't broken any laws. They suggested she get him to see a doctor, maybe check for a head injury we had missed. PTSD from being lost.
He paused. Then he looked around to make sure no one else was listening.
Sarah did the wellness check, said Joseph seemed fine when she talked to him. Polite and cooperative, but she said something felt wrong. Said when she walked into that house it felt like walking into a meat locker. It was too cold. The heat wasn't on and the windows were all open in the middle of October. Kids were wearing winter coats inside. I wanted to tell him then, to say what I had been thinking, but the words stuck in my throat. That's gotta be some kind of trauma, I managed. 2 days alone in the wilderness can mess with your head.
Yeah, Tom said, but he didn't sound convinced.
There's more though. Emily told Sarah that Joseph doesn't really sleep anymore, just sits in a chair all night and faces the wall. He doesn't want to eat. She's tried everything, his favorite foods, takeout, even just soup. But he won't touch it. Says he's not hungry. It's been 2 weeks, Mason. 2 weeks without eating.
Over the next few months, I heard things. Not directly. I wasn't close to the Bentley family, but through the small-town network. Stories that got stranger as time went on. Emily had taken the kids to stay with her sister in Farmington for a few weeks. When someone asked why, she said Joseph needed space to recover. But her sister, Maria, told people the real reason. The kids were terrified of their own father. Sophie had woken up one night to find Joseph standing in her doorway, smiling at her in the dark. Not a normal smile either, she claimed. When Emily asked him about it, he said he was just checking on his kids. But Sophie swore his eyes had been reflecting like a cat's eyes that night. Joseph had been fired from his job at the tribal administration office after 3 weeks. His coworker told me about it when I ran into him at the gas station.
Oh, it wasn't any one thing, Ben said. Just everything was wrong. He'd sit at his desk for hours without moving. Not working, not looking at his computer, just sitting there perfectly still. And the way he'd watch people, like he was studying them and learning them. Janet from accounting said she caught him at her desk one morning before anyone else got in. He'd been going through her personal photos. When she asked what he was doing, he said he was practicing.
Practicing what?
Practicing being normal. That's what he said, practicing being normal.
Someone saw him walking along the highway at 3 a.m. one night, miles from his house. When the deputy stopped to check on him, Joseph said he was walking home. but that was the opposite direction of his house. About 6 months after the rescue, Emily brought the kids back home. I don't know what fully convinced her to come back. I can understand it though. She thought things would be better, that everything could go back to normal. But there was no going back to normal. A year passed, then another. I stopped thinking about it, and I guess the town did too, because I stopped hearing much about Joseph and the Benellis. Then on a Tuesday morning in November, my phone rang. It was Sarah.
Mason, you need to turn on the news.
I was getting ready for work with coffee in hand. Why? What's going on?
Just turn it on.
Her voice was shaking. I grabbed the remote. The local news was showing footage of a house fire, smoke billowing into the early morning sky, all black and thick. The banner at the bottom read, "Breaking, multiple fatalities in Cortez house fire." Then they showed the address. It was Joseph Benelli's house. Jesus Christ, I whispered.
They're saying 3 dead. Emily and both the kids,
Sarah said.
And it wasn't from the fire. They had single gunshot wounds to the head while they were sleeping. Then someone set the house on fire.
Joseph?
He's gone. They found his truck in the driveway, but no sign of him. They've got dogs out looking, helicopters too, nothing yet.
The details came out over the next few days. The neighbors had heard nothing. No gunshots, no screams. The family had been dead for hours before the fire started. The search for Joseph went on for weeks. They brought in teams from 3 counties. They found human footprints, but they were barefoot and seemed to vanish right into nothing. Through the grapevine I heard, they found strips of what looked like human skin dangling from tree branches. But they never found Joseph. The investigation officially concluded that Joseph had suffered a psychotic break, killed his family, and fled into the wilderness. They assumed he was dead somewhere out there. Exposure, they said. Animals. The case went cold. I ended up moving to Albuquerque. I didn't feel like staying in that town anymore. But a while later, I got a call from Tom.
They found something,
he said. Tom, I really don't.
Just listen. They were doing a training exercise up near Sleeping Ute. New SAR volunteers teaching them grid search patterns. That same area where we found Joseph a few years ago.
My stomach was starting to knot up.
They found some human remains scattered over about 30 yards. Mostly bones, some clothing fragments, pretty heavily scavenged by animals.
He paused.
They ran DNA. Mason, it was Joseph Benelli.
That's impossible. Joseph killed his family about 6 months ago. If he died out there...
No.
Tom interrupted.
You're not quite getting me. The ME looked at the remains, based on decomposition, weathering, insect activity, plant growth through the bones. He's estimating time of death at approximately 2.5 years ago.
I felt dizzy. What?
2.5 years, Mason. That places the age around when Joseph first went missing. Before we found him. Before we brought him back.
I couldn't speak.
They found his driver's license, his wedding ring. Everything checks out. If these remains are from 2.5 years ago, if Joseph Benelli died up there when he first went missing, then what the hell did we bring back from that mountain? What lived in that house for 2 years? What killed Emily and those kids?
Subscribe now for hundreds of true scary stories and real monster sightings. Wait till the end of the video for the discussion question as well. Beware the golden arches. This world is a strange one. McDonald's is the most successful fast food restaurant in the world. It may not be the healthiest place, but it sure is convenient and delicious. But even the most falsely happiest of places can be riddled with dangers and horrors. Ghosts lurk around every corner. Perverts and creepy strangers watch us from afar, and creatures of the unknown wait to make us their prey. So, to make sure you have nightmares of every possible location, here are 5 true scary stories of McDonald's submitted by viewers. If the burgers don't kill you, something will. Number 1. Drive-Through Ghost. Submitted by Maynard. 2015. I worked for my local McDonald's for about 4 months. Yeah, it didn't last long. I like to believe that there's something better for me out there than fast food. Plus, this experience didn't exactly make me want to stay. It's definitely the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Trying to kiss ass and move up quickly, I let the managers know that I would cover any shift they needed me to, and I could fill in for any call-ins. I needed the money. The more hours, the better. Well, one night at around 8 p.m., just before my bedtime, yay, I got a call from work. Someone from the night shift had called in. Very irritated and tired, I hesitantly agreed to cover the shift and got up to get ready. I had never worked overnight before, not at that McDonald's and not at any of my previous jobs. I was kind of excited. I mean, it was night. There would be at least half as many customers coming through, and the manager on duty was John, the most laid-back guy that worked there. Easy money. When I arrived around 8:30, they were slammed. I clocked in and chiseled away at the mountain of customers in the lobby. By 10:30, the sudden wave had died down, and the building was mostly empty. The previous shift leader left me with nothing but a good luck, even though this was my first night shift. So it was just me and John. He was busy checking drawers or something, while I manned the drive-thru, the front counter, and the grill. Needless to say, I was nervous. If too many people pulled in, I was fucked. My drive-thru time would be horrid. So, instead of remaining relaxed like I thought I would, I ended up so focused that my heart was pounding the whole night. Anyway, at our restaurant, I'm not sure if it's the same for every Mickey D's, our headsets will chime whenever someone pulls into the drive-thru. It's a kind of pixelated bell sound that gets very annoying, very fast. This is exactly what I heard all of a sudden. So, naturally, I greeted the customer. "Hi, welcome to McDonald's. How can I help you today?" I said with so much fake enthusiasm it even made me sick. I never quite understood if it was a magnet or a scale that told us if a car drove through, but the microphone was on, ready to pick up the customer's voice as they ordered. Yet, all I heard was white noise. Nobody picked up, nobody spoke. I didn't even hear the rumble of an engine idling. It was as if no one was there. Now, this wasn't too weird. We've had this happen a few times since I started. The thing can be triggered just by someone driving around the building or a person walking by. The thing needed fixed, that's for sure. I didn't want to know every time someone took out the trash in the back as they rolled the bins over the drive-thru. After about 3 minutes of static, the mic clicked off, meaning whatever was on the wait was gone. Finally, no more annoying noise in my ear, but less than a minute later, it clicked on again, that bell chiming loudly in my ear. I rolled my eyes and repeated my greeting. "Hi, welcome to McDonald's, how can I help you?" And again, there was no reply. The mic stayed on longer this time, though. I swear at one point I could hear heavy breathing. I started to get freaked out. At that moment, I was pretty sure someone was outside trying to mess with me. It turned off after about 10 minutes of me listening to nothing. I was tempted to take off the headset and make John wear it, but my be-all-I-can-be attitude got the better of me. I tried to distract myself. I started scrubbing the counters, which had already been wiped down. and checking to see if anything in the lobby needed restocked. But everything was fine. I needed to keep myself busy. There was just something so sinister about the darkness of the night just beyond those large lobby windows. When the bell chimed once again, I nearly fainted. I should have probably turned the volume down on that headset. Before I could say my shallow, meaningless greeting, I heard the loudest, blood-curdling scream. The moment I heard this screech, I threw off my headset and backed away from it. What the hell was that? Shakily, I put my headset back on. I was pissed and terrified at the same time. Without another thought, I ran angrily out of the store and headed toward the drive-thru. I stood right next to the menu, and there was no one there. But still, somehow, the static from my headset never disappeared. The mic was still going. Whatever made the drive-thru go off was still there. And then I heard it. "I see you." A slowly whispering voice coming from the mic. I ran back inside as fast as I possibly could. I had been standing right next to the mic. No one was there. No one could have possibly made that sound. There was no one that could have spoken those words to me. I ran back into the light and warmth of the building and into the safety behind the counter. I found John. He was at the manager's desk, head in his hand, while typing in dates on the upcoming schedule. "What the hell was that?" I said louder than I meant to be. He jumped in his chair and turned around. "Christ, man, you scared the hell out of me." "What are you trying to pull?" I asked. "What are you talking about? I haven't done anything." He turned to continue typing on his computer. I kind of felt bad. I just interrogated my superior, the only fun superior that worked there. Shit. I walked up front and stood behind the counter, just waiting. It was about 1:30 when I looked at the clock again. We were about halfway through the graveyard shift. The night was going by so slow. I ended up just standing in the drive-thru nook. That way I could just play on my phone away from the view of the nearest camera. We had had only 2 customers in the last hour, so it was even more slow than I thought it would be. So I just stood there, leaning against the counter by the POS computer, playing Clash of Clans and checking Facebook every so often. But suddenly, I felt cold air on my forearm. It gave me chills. I looked over toward the drive-thru window, and it was ever so slightly open. I didn't mind. I paid it no attention and continued to invade random online folks. Slam! I dropped my phone, breaking the screen when it hit the ground. I nearly had a heart attack. My eyes darted all over, searching for the origin of that noise. The drive-thru window had been thrown wide open, but I had been standing right next to it. I hadn't heard anybody run off or walk up, and I definitely hadn't seen anybody. So who the fuck just opened the drive-thru window? I was done. I took my headset off and stood in the kitchen pretending to work, waiting for this terrible shift to end. Whether or not someone drove through the drive-thru, I didn't care anymore. I wasn't coming back after that night. The rest of the night, or morning, I guess, passed by without any further incidents. Never in my life have I encountered anything so strange and terrifying. Standing out there, right next to the microphone that cold night, then hearing those words whispered to me. I will never forget it, and I will do anything in my power to avoid having to work fast food. And I am no longer a fan of horror movies. I know I'm in denial, but I pray every day that what I heard that night was nothing but a prankster, not a ghost or a demon that felt like taunting me. But if that's really what it was, I'm scared that there's nothing stopping it from happening again. Number 2. Pervert at the Habit Trail. Submitted by Close Call. Remember when McDonald's had those jungle gyms with the ball pits? Yeah, for the longest time, those were the hotspot for children to jump around and just have a shit ton of fun. Hell, I even remember as a child playing with my temporary friends in those balls. Every time we'd go to McDonald's, I'd gleefully find other kids I hadn't met before, and we'd jump into that rainbow-colored pit. Now, though, with a child of my own, I've heard plenty of horror stories that will make me keep my kids away from the habit trails altogether. Well, actually, it's not so much the horror stories I've heard that scare me. It's an experience that happened not too long ago. I try not to let my kids eat fast food. It's disgusting, it's unhealthy, and it's addictive. Eating fast food in and of itself is a terrible habit. But there is one thing it does have that tempted me to treat my daughter and son to a couple of Happy Meals one day. Convenience. Around noon, I was enjoying my day off with the kids. My wife was at work, and I hadn't bought groceries like I was supposed to. Not to mention, I was exhausted from work. This was my first day off in a very long while. So, when my son Chris started begging for McNuggets, I thought, what the hell, and stopped on by our local artery clogging experts. That McDonald's was extremely packed. There had to have been 4 dozen people in there either lined up waiting to order or sitting down awkwardly staring at each other. Expectedly, the moment the kids saw the play area through the windows in the back, they took off. They hadn't even told me exactly what they wanted to eat. Figured, though, they probably only wanted to stop by McDonald's to play on the habit trail. After several minutes, I was finally up to order. I got them both a couple of nugget Happy Meals and headed to the play area and sat down at a bench. The kids frolicked and played all over the damn thing with 10 other children, most of which looked like they hadn't been bathed in a week. As you can probably tell, I'm not very fond of the McDonald's scene. But again, I was desperate that day. If a big hunk of plastic tubes and ladders could babysit my kids for an hour, I was fine with that. The kids played for about 10 minutes before they finally came down to eat their food. We were enjoying our meal when I noticed something rather strange. There was a chubbier child in the ball pit. He was redheaded with curly hair. What was strange was the expression on his little face. He looked like he was about to cry at any moment. He was frowning and tearing up, his eyes locked on one point in the room. I looked to see what he was staring at. It was just a glass window with lightly busy midday traffic just beyond it. So I just kept eating my food, trying not to pay any mind to the motionless kid. But for every bite I took, I was more and more worried, curious. I mean, my kids were here too. If this kid was crying, I'd like to know why. Eventually, he pulled himself up out of the ball pit and began to walk back over to a woman that must have been his mother. But on the walk over, I noticed the kid's pants were down, and he started pulling them back up. My first thought was, Jesus Christ, this kid just shit in the ball pit. And at that point, I was ready to leave. My appetite was gone, the appetite I barely had in the first place. I let my kids finish eating, though, not saying a word about what I saw. Once they were done, I told them we had to go, and despite their whining efforts to make me stay, I made them get back in the car. Well, later that week, I was reading the newspaper. I made the mistake of drinking hot coffee when I read a certain article. I literally spat it out on myself when I read it. At that very same McDonald's that we had gone to, a man had been arrested for, get this, sexually assaulting children while hiding in the ball pit. Holy shit. Luckily, my kids had never gone in there themselves that day, but they had been so close to it. And in the headline photo, there was a woman being interviewed. She was crying. It was that chubby boy's mother. I remembered her face and that red hair. This moment terrified me, shocked me more than I had ever felt before. I feared for my children and for the society as a whole. We let our kids run around, play, and trust that the world built around us is safe and protected. But that day, right under my nose, was someone that, within seconds, could have ruined my children's lives, forced a lifetime of therapy on them, and took away their normalcy from then on. I am so grateful that my kids were spared that. I can only pray that that poor little boy grew up all right and that that perverted fucker got what he deserved. Also, if you're wondering about the case itself, this happened around '89, and I've tried a few times these days to find it online. But I guess it's just not on the web. Doubt the story if you want, but as a father, I'm not spreading this to tell some disgusting lie. I'm telling you this story as a warning and a cautionary tale. No matter how you've raised your kids, stay close to them and keep your eyes open. Number 3. Bathroom Creeper. Submitted by M. Perkins. Public bathrooms have always scared me. In school, no matter how bad I had to go, I would not use the bathrooms. I just couldn't even force myself to use them. I mean, I've seen kids make fun of other kids just for going to the bathroom. Kids are horrible. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. People simply scared me. They would embarrass you, humiliate you, hurt your feelings, all over something so natural and stupid. So for most of my life, I avoided public restrooms. But one day, this was in 2002, we were driving through Dallas at the end of a road trip on our way home. It was me and 2 other friends, Jessica and Ruby. It was maybe 11 at night, and we were on the highway. They were starving. I was tired but had to pee bad, and we were still an hour from home. I had already been holding it for about 2 hours. I'm surprised I even made it that far. Anyway, we were passing one of the many dozens of random McDonald's in Dallas, and Jessica suggested we pulled over and take a break. Of course, I was extremely hesitant about using the bathroom there. I would almost rather pee in a bottle in the car than go into a public restroom. For the first time in my life, my body won out on this one. I got out of the car and ran before I peed all over myself. It only took me a second to locate the bathrooms, and to my dismay, there were no family restrooms. I was already there and seconds away from bursting. I threw myself through the swinging door. First, the smell hit me. Now let me tell you, just because it was a woman's restroom doesn't mean it wasn't disgusting. This thing smelled rancid, sort of like spoiled milk or a rotten diaper. It was bad. There were 3 stalls. I quickly checked for feet below the doors and saw that they were each empty. The coast was clear. I opened the first one and nearly threw up. There was piss all over the seat, used toilet paper scattered on top and next to the toilet, and it looked as if the thing had been used daily but hadn't been flushed for weeks. I shut it and very reluctantly checked the second stall. That one was clear and clean, but somehow, for some reason, smelled 3 times as bad as the other one. Just in case, I checked the third stall. It was disgusting as well, so I stepped back and into the second and locked it. Well, it didn't really lock. The little bolt caught in the hole, but anyone that wanted inside that stall would just have to push. That creeped me out, but I figured I'd be in and out in a few seconds, so I covered the seat in toilet paper and sat down slowly. It was a relief to finally get all of that out of my system. 15 seconds of relief later, I was about to stand up when I heard the swinging door open. I froze. Someone had entered the room with me. Immediately, I stayed quiet as possible, trying to pretend I wasn't there. Yeah, I'm a freak. I just really hated being in a vulnerable spot like that. I waited for the person to do their business. But I never heard the faucet come on. In fact, I never heard anyone open a stall. That's odd, I thought. I had heard the footsteps after the door opened, but now there was no sound. If anyone was there, I'd definitely hear them breathing at least. I waited a few more minutes. Still, no other sound came. So I assumed I was safe. Maybe somebody had walked in and backed out. Maybe someone changed their minds about coming in. I didn't know, but to be sure, I lowered my head ever so slowly to check for the feet of someone else in the room with me. There was a man's face staring up at me. He smiled a toothless grin. He was lying down on the bathroom floor looking up at me. He was dirty with messy gray hair and a darker gray beard. I jumped off the seat, pulling my pants up, while trying to cover up all my exposed skin with my arms. I screamed. I knew everyone in that building would have heard me. A second later, I heard laughing and the sound of footsteps running out of the bathroom. Then, maybe 10 seconds after that, I could hear Jessica and Ruby. "Are you okay? Sherry, what happened?" Jessica called, knocking on my stall door. I could barely even talk. I didn't know I was crying, but there were tears running down my face. I remembered I needed to pull my pants up, so I did. I stepped out to see their surprised and worried faces. "Oh my God, you don't look good. Did something happen? Are you hurt?" Jessica wanted answers. I shook my head. Some fucking pervert was staring up at me from under the stall. "Jesus, are you okay? Where'd he go?" Ruby sounded angry. "I don't know, he just ran out," I replied, starting to calm down. We all walked back to the car, eyes peeled for that creepy man. The girls begged me to make a police report, but I couldn't help but feel, I don't know, weird, I guess. I just wanted to get home, take a shower, get in my own bed. Besides, I only saw the man for maybe 5 seconds before he was up and gone. I climbed in the back seat of the car and sat back. Before we stopped, I was tired and ready to go to sleep, but now I felt wide awake and homesick, a little bit shaky. As we took off, I ended up glancing back at the place, the big neon arch hurting my eyes. Then, I saw him. I swear to God it was the same man. He was standing exactly where we had been parked, smiling and waving goodbye at me. I got chills. Travel in packs, girls. Keep each other safe. I can only be thankful that that creepy man wasn't more desperate. Number 4. McDonald's Mugging. Submitted by Candescent Skies. This is one of those things that I, and probably everyone else, easily assumed would never happen to me. Needless to say, I didn't expect it, and it has left me very twitchy and nervous since then. This happened in 2007 when I lived in Kansas. There was a local McDonald's in my town that I stopped at every morning, or at least tried to. One of those half gas station, half fast food joints. This one just happened to be at a very convenient corner on my way to work, so I'd often go in, grab a McMuffin, and a can of Starbucks espresso to get my day going. This was a Tuesday, and I remember it all plain as day, unfortunately. For some reason or another, the McDonald's side of the store was crowded that morning. There were at least 30 elderly folks there, chatting up the place like a bunch of teenagers. I almost walked out. The line was a bit long, and I only had 20 minutes to get to work. The drive itself was 10 minutes long, so I didn't have too long to be waiting. But I had never been late, and I was starved that morning, so I figured what the hell. I stepped in line and waited, eyeballing the menu to see if there was anything new, or if there was something else I wanted, even though there was no way in hell I'd be changing up my routine. As I stood waiting, I felt something poke against my lower back. Before I could turn around, I heard someone whisper a bit too close in my ear. "Don't do anything." My heart froze. I felt paralyzed. The voice continued while I tried not to panic. "I'm just going to grab your wallet. Everything will be fine if you just don't move and don't say a word." I was silent, but honestly, I had never been more terrified. Maybe it was a kid with a butter knife trying to take advantage of me, or maybe it was an ex-convict, desperate for money with a gun in his hand. I had no way to be sure, and I wasn't about to die on a Tuesday morning at a fucking McDonald's. The fuck is it? I heard him nearly shout behind me. He just barely managed to whisper. The man sounded pissed. That's when I realized I must have left my wallet in the car. Often, I would put my wallet in the passenger seat or in the cup holder, as it would make my back hurt or my bottom uncomfortable. "So where the fuck is it?" he asked very hurriedly. It's in my car," I said nervously. "Well, looks like we're going for a little ride then." He seemed relieved. Fuck, I thought. He was happy we'd be going in my car. Away from people, away from prying eyes. He could make me go anywhere he wanted me to. God, I was so scared. My heart was racing. I wanted to take off running and scream that someone was mugging me. I was surrounded by so many people, but I felt more afraid than I've ever been in my life. And for the first time in my life, I was actually afraid I was going to die. I started thinking. Quickly, I had to figure something out. I had to get myself out of this fucking mess. If I turned around or made any sudden movements, surely he'd use the weapon that he had shoved into my spine. If I spoke too loud, I'd be dead before anyone could do anything. So, I was stuck, life endangered in the breakfast line at a McDonald's. How the hell had my life turned out that way? Anyway, there was one thing I could do that didn't require me risking the existence of an actual weapon behind me. The guy didn't sound old, but he didn't sound young either. I thought I could talk my way out of this. I swallowed hard and gathered my courage. "I don't think you want that wallet," I whispered back to him, my head turned toward my side as far as I could get away with. "Shut up. Start walking." He seemed to be ignoring me. "I don't think $10 is worth 15 years in prison. Maximum security prison, too." He must have heard me that time, because he seemed to stand still. He didn't urge me to keep walking. I tried to look even further behind me to see his face, but I couldn't. I did manage to see a woman with 3 unwieldy preteen boys come in. I continued. "Robbery with a firearm is a first-degree felony, and I honestly don't think you'd be fast enough to shoot or stab me before I ran through those doors." What the fuck was I thinking? My heart felt like I was going to explode. Every word I whispered nearly came out stuttered, but somehow I found the power to make them sound confident. I was no lawyer, but I remembered a bit of the basic stuff from a legal studies course in high school. The kind of shit they nail into your head and can't forget. Thank God for that this time. "Shut the fuck up. I'm sure you've got more money than that. I see the coat you're wearing. I saw the car you got out of." "Well, if there's not more than 10, he sort of snickered. "Let's just hope there's more than 10. Fuck. It hadn't worked, and now I was sure he was threatening to kill me if I didn't have the money. And the fucked up part? I really only had $10 in my wallet. I had recently paid a few bills and was ready to glide through the rest of the week with food from home. I've actually done it a few times before. "Come on, keep moving." He shoved the weapon in my back hard. It was cold and painful. I didn't want to move, but I felt I had no choice. "Jimmy!" I heard a female voice behind us shout. Then there was a hard smack as if something fell to the floor. A lot of movement behind me made me turn. The man was no longer looking. I turned around and saw it. One of the boys that had come in was wrestling around with his brother when he was shoved into my mugger. The mugger himself, who was far more thin and frail than he had sounded, and wearing a thick black hoodie, was on his ass in the floor staring at something that lay on the ground. I looked toward it. A jet black pistol. It wouldn't have been noticeable blending in with that damn hoodie he wore. In an instant, I made a break for it, and so did he. Sadly, he was closer, and he grabbed the gun. I expected the worst to happen. But it didn't. He grabbed the gun, shoved it in his pocket, and ran full speed out of the place. When I was sure he was out of the building, I looked around and saw that everyone had seen it too. They had seen the man drop the gun. Immediately, I got out my phone and called the police. I made a statement, told them everything. They talked to several other folks as well. In the end, though, nobody got a good enough look at his face, and last I heard, he was never caught. I like to hope that he ended up trying and failing again and was arrested for a different crime, because it is honestly a bit hard to sleep at night knowing that there are terrible people out there, and then there are even worse people too, who are still at large. Number 5. Midnight McDonald's Creature. Submitted by Marco Poco. This short but terrifying experience took place around late September of 2014. Me and some friends were making a night of it at my place, and at around 1 in the morning, we all had the munchies. We decided to hop in my van and drive over to the McDonald's that was about 2 miles down the road. It had been raining that night just before we left, so the empty streets had that creepy, wet glimmer from the street lamps. It was already an eerie scene. The van's air conditioner hadn't worked for months either, so I usually drove with the windows down. We pulled up to the drive-thru. I noticed that there was no one in the parking lot, and not a single car in the drive-thru. That was fine by me. It just meant we'd get our food more quickly. It is important to note, though, that at this particular McDonald's, there were numerous trees on the right, and the restaurant itself to the left as you pulled through. It was almost a forest, but it was too thin to really be that, and just on the other side of it, the island of trees led to a pharmacy. We pulled up in front of the menu and waited to be greeted. And waited. And waited. Eventually, I said hello, trying to get someone's attention. But no one answered. The guys were telling me to just pull forward and see if they'd meet me at the window. One of them said that despite the 24-hour sign, that they might be closed for some repairs or something. I doubted that. If anything, this whole situation was kind of suspicious. Just when I decided to go ahead and pull forward to the window, one of my friends said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, stop." I put my foot back on the brake and turned toward him. "Did you hear that? There's something growling over there." I thought he was joking, until I turned toward where he was looking. I saw glowing yellow eyes next to a tree about 5 yards away from the van. I could just barely make out a low, steady growl. I assumed it was just a dog, so I rolled up the windows on that side so it didn't try to climb in or jump at us. I continued to pull forward when suddenly the thing that had been behind the tree ran out of the darkness and beside the van. I only got a brief look at it, but I was entirely sure that this was no dog. It was more the size of a grown mule, but thin and bony. Its skin was green and brown with random hair scattered all over it. I kept my foot on the brake and rolled up the rest of the windows right away. I didn't want to keep moving, just in case my mind was playing tricks on me, and this was some kid playing a joke. We all waited, spooked out of our minds. I kept looking out of the windows to try to find it. The thing must have been just below us where we weren't able to see. Then someone in the back screamed. I looked toward them and saw at the back window, just above the edge of the metal, were a set of eyes and horns. Small but pointed horns. The thing was just staring in at us. And at that moment, we all screamed and jumped away from the creature. Then, with a loud screeching noise, the creature took off back into the small patch of trees. I didn't hesitate. I drove back home. It wasn't worth a Big Mac staying next to those damned woods with that weird thing out there. I have no idea what we all saw that night, and we haven't seen anything like it since. Its eyes looked reptilian with that sort of black slit in the middle. I honestly have never seen an animal in real life or on TV that looked anything like it. And I hope I never see it again. The next time you're out on the town and just can't wait to get home to have your next meal, think twice about stopping anywhere, even McDonald's. You are never as safe as you want to be. All it takes is one person, one spirit, one creature to decide that you will be their next victim, and you will never see it coming. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks. Time for the discussion question. What was your most terrifying or worst experience at McDonald's? Food poisoning? An attack? For me, it would be the time I went with my fiancée one morning, trying to enjoy my bacon egg cheese biscuit, when a toddler pulled down her pants and shit in the floor. That was an entirely different kind of biscuit that I was not in the mood for.